I can fix it. The kid said it quietly. No drama, no raised voice. Just 3 words dropped into a crowd of 80 professional mechanics who had spent the last 6 hours failing at the same problem. Nobody laughed at first. They just stared. Then someone did laugh, and then everyone did, because the boy standing there was 20 years old, covered in grease, holding a toolbox that looked like it had survived 2 world wars, and the motorcycle in front of him had defeated every expert in America. If this story hits you somewhere deep, the way real ones always do, subscribe to this channel right now and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that parking lot outside Phoenix, Arizona, and find out what happened when the most unlikely mechanic in the room turned out to be the only one who actually understood the machine. The desert outside Phoenix had been loud all morning, and Jackson Callahan liked it that way. He stood at the edge of the gathering area with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, watching 80 mechanics move around his motorcycle like doctors circling a patient who had already flatlined. The annual Hells Angels rally had been going for 2 days. 2 days of engines and Brotherhood and the kind of noise that felt like freedom when you'd spent 30 years earning the right to be surrounded by it. But Jackson Iron Jack, to everyone who knew him, Jack to the people he actually trusted, couldn't hear any of it the way he was supposed to. Not this year, because the one machine that mattered most to him was sitting 15 feet away, completely silent, and no one could tell him why. The 1985 Harley-Davidson Softail had been in that condition for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since Jack had been riding south on Route 89 at dusk, the desert cooling around him, the engine humming the way it had hummed for 30 years, and then nothing. No warning, no sputtering, no gradual fade. The engine simply stopped, like someone had reached inside the machine and closed their fist around the heart of it. The motorcycle rolled to a stop on the shoulder, and Jack sat there for a long time in the sudden silence, one hand still on the throttle, not quite believing what had just happened. He'd called for a truck. He'd had the bike transported to his shop back in Phoenix. He'd called in people he trusted, men who had worked on Harleys for decades, men who understood these machines the way surgeons understood the human body. None of them could find the problem. One said the fuel system. Another said the ignition. A third spent 4 hours on the electrical components and came away with nothing but a headache and a list of things that weren't wrong. So Jack brought the bike to the rally. Because if there was any place in America where someone could fix an engine no one else could touch, it was here. 1,000 mechanics had converged on this desert over the years. The best builders, the best restorers, the best technicians in the country. And Jack had announced 3 days before the event that he was offering $30,000 to anyone who could bring his father's motorcycle back to life. The reward attracted attention. 80 mechanics had registered for the challenge. They arrived with equipment that cost more than most people's houses. Digital diagnostic systems, specialized compression tools, custom rigs built for precisely this kind of antique restoration work. Some of them had YouTube channels. Some had been featured in magazines. One had restored a motorcycle that sold at auction for over $200,000. They had been working since 7 that morning. It was now past 2 in the afternoon. The Harley had not made a single sound. Jack watched a man in a pressed red uniform remove the carburetor for the 3rd time and stare into it like the answer might appear if he looked hard enough. Beside him, a younger mechanic was scrolling through a tablet, pulling up schematics that Jack suspected had nothing to do with the 1985 engine built before half these people were born. 2 other mechanics were having an argument in low voices about whether the problem was electrical or mechanical, and Jack could tell from the way they kept glancing at each other that neither of them actually knew. Marcus, Jack spoke to the man standing 2 steps to his left. Marcus Delaney was the chapter's road captain, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a gray beard and the kind of eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. He'd been with the chapter for 22 years. He was the second person Jack trusted with anything that actually mattered. "Tell me something honest," Jack said. Marcus watched the mechanics for a moment. "I think they're lost," he said. "Yeah, I think they've been lost since about 9 this morning, and nobody wants to be the first one to say it out loud." Jack nodded slowly. That matched what he was seeing. The body language had shifted around 10 o'clock, subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice. But Jack had been reading rooms for 3 decades. The confidence that had been visible in those first arrivals, the quiet authority of men who knew they were the best at what they did, had been slowly replaced by something else. something that looked like frustration wearing the mask of concentration. My father built that engine, Jack said. I know. He put that thing together in his garage the year before I got my patch. Took him 8 months. I used to sit and watch him work on weekends. Marcus was quiet. I rode it out of his driveway 6 months before he died, Jack said. He stood on the porch and watched me go down the street, and when I came back around, he was still standing there, and he had this look on his face. Jack stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Marcus had known him long enough to understand what that look meant and what it cost Jack to think about it now. The motorcycle had been on the road for 30 years since that day. 30 years of highway miles and mountain passes and desert heat and winter cold and every kind of weather the American landscape could produce. Jack had ridden it across 17 states. He'd ridden it to funerals and weddings, and on the night his own son was born, when he'd needed to get outside and feel the open road under him, because the emotion was too large to contain in a hospital waiting room. The motorcycle was not just a machine. It was the only thing Jack still had that his father had touched with his own hands. And right now it was sitting dead in the middle of a parking lot in Arizona while 80 professional mechanics stood around it doing nothing useful. 30,000 isn't enough, Marcus said quietly. Jack glanced at him. What do you mean? I mean, if somebody figures that out today, 30,000 isn't going to feel like what that fix is actually worth to you. Jack didn't argue. He just watched the mechanics and said nothing. It was 15 minutes later when the kid appeared. Jack noticed him before the crowd did, which was something because there were at least 300 people in that parking lot, members. Their families, guests, vendors, people who'd driven from 4 different states just to be part of the rally atmosphere. The crowd had been thick around the motorcycle all day, keeping a respectful distance while the mechanics worked the way crowds always keep distance from something they sense is important. The kid came from the direction of the main vendor area, walking with purpose but without rush, and he was carrying a toolbox that caught Jack's attention before anything else about him did. It was old. Not restored old, not collector old, just old. The kind of old that comes from decades of actual use, the metal dented and scratched and darkened in the way that tools get it when they spend their lives being picked up and put down and picked up again in garages where real work happens. The kid himself looked young, too young. Blonde hair that needed cutting, blue eyes that were moving across the crowd with focused attention, jeans worn through at one knee, a black jacket that had seen better decades. He looked like he'd driven through the night to get here and hadn't stopped to think about what he looked like when he arrived. He was making his way directly toward the motorcycle. One of the mechanics, a man named Garrett Walsh, who ran a custom shop in Sacramento and had appeared in 3 different motorcycle magazines in the last 2 years, stepped into the kid's path before he got within 10 feet of the bike. Hold on, this area is for registered technicians. The kid stopped. He looked at Walsh without any particular reaction. Not intimidated, not aggressive, just measuring. I want to look at the motorcycle, he said. Yeah, I gathered that. Walsh had the particular confidence of a man who was used to being the most qualified person in any room he entered. Registration closed 2 days ago. We have 80 mechanics on this bike already. We don't need walk-ins. How long have you been working on it? Excuse me? How long, the kid said. Since this morning, Walsh stared at him. 7 hours. Another mechanic offered a younger man named Dennis, who'd been assisting Walsh and apparently hadn't received the signal that this conversation wasn't meant to be participated in. The kid looked at the motorcycle. 7 hours, he said, and it still won't start. That's none of your business, son. It means you haven't found the problem yet. Something shifted in Walsh's expression, not anger exactly, more like the particular sharpening of attention that happens when someone says something you don't want to hear and can't argue with. We have everything under control. Then it'll start soon, the kid said simply. If it does, I'll walk away. But if it doesn't, he looked at Walsh directly. I want a chance. The crowd nearest them had been listening. Word moved outward in the way it always does in large gatherings, not through announcements, but through a dozen people turning to the people beside them and passing along what they'd just heard. Within 2 minutes, a significant portion of the parking lot knew that a kid in a dirty jacket was asking to work on Iron Jack's bike. The laughter started small and grew. It wasn't cruel laughter. Not exactly. It was the laughter of people looking at something that didn't fit the picture they expected a 20-year-old with an old toolbox among 80 credentialed professionals and processing the absurdity of it. "Kid, this isn't a school project," Walsh said, and the crowd that heard it laughed harder. "I know what it is," the kid said. "You know what it is?" Walsh looked around, inviting the crowd to share in this. "This motorcycle belonged to the president of this chapter's father. It's a 1985 Harley Softail that hasn't run in 3 weeks. We've got men here who've worked on machines like this for longer than you've been alive. Then one of them should have found the problem by now." The laughter stopped. Walsh's jaw tightened. "What's your name?" "Noah. Noah Bennett." "Well, Noah Bennett, what makes you think you can do something that 80 professional mechanics can't?" Noah was quiet for a moment, not performing quietness, not using silence as a dramatic device. He seemed to actually be thinking about how to answer the question accurately. "Because they're trying to see the problem," he finally said. He placed one hand on the side of the motorcycle, not touching the engine, just resting against the frame feeling. "I'm trying to listen to it." Nobody laughed at that. The crowd wasn't sure what to do with it. Jack had worked his way through the gathered people while this exchange was happening, and now he was standing 6 feet from the kid, close enough to hear everything. He studied Noah for a moment, the hands, the eyes, the posture. Jack had spent 30 years assessing people. It was a survival skill in his world. You learned fast to see the difference between performance and the real thing. The kid wasn't performing. He was standing next to a dead motorcycle and talking about listening to it, and he meant every word. "What do you think is wrong with it?" Jack asked. The crowd quieted immediately. When Iron Jack spoke at a rally, people listened. Noah turned to look at him. "I don't know yet," he said. Walsh made a sound. "At least he's honest," Marcus said from behind Jack's shoulder, and someone in the crowd laughed, not at Noah this time, but at the situation. "What do you need?" Jack said. Noah looked at the motorcycle. 10 minutes, he said, "just to listen." Jack thought about it for exactly as long as it took him to make a decision. "You've got 10 minutes, he said. The reaction from the crowd was mixed. Some people were curious, some were skeptical. The 80 mechanics were almost uniformly annoyed, and Walsh in particular had the expression of a man who felt that a professional boundary had been crossed in a way he would remember. But Jack hadn't built his reputation by doing what was comfortable or predictable, and there was something about this kid, something in the steadiness of those blue eyes and the directness of those answers that told him the 10 minutes wouldn't be wasted. Noah set his toolbox down beside the motorcycle. He opened it. The crowd leaned forward to see what was inside. What they saw made several people exchange glances. The tools were simple: a few wrenches, a set of screwdrivers, one of which was visibly old, the handle worn smooth from years of use, a compression gauge, a small pen light, and a notebook, a physical notebook, the kind with a cardboard cover filled with handwritten notes in a small, precise script. One of the younger mechanics standing near Walsh said something under his breath that might have been, "You've got to be kidding me," and Walsh didn't contradict him. Noah didn't look at anyone. He crouched beside the motorcycle. He placed his left hand against the engine casing, palm flat, and closed his eyes. The crowd went very quiet. This was not what anyone expected. It wasn't what the professional mechanics expected. They had diagnostic machines and computer analysis and 45 years of experience between them, and this kid was crouching next to the bike with his eyes closed and his hand on the metal, like he was trying to read its temperature. But something happened in that parking lot in the next 60 seconds that nobody quite talked about afterward because it was hard to explain. The crowd stopped being a crowd in the usual sense. The individual conversations faded. The casual movement, people shifting weight, checking phones, talking to the person next to them, all of it slowed and then stopped. Something in the quality of Noah's concentration pulled the attention of 300 people and held it. He wasn't doing anything you could film for a diagnostic video or describe in a magazine article. He was listening. After perhaps 2 minutes, Noah opened his eyes. He opened the toolbox and removed the worn screwdriver. He used it to remove the side cover panel, working with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this specific motion 10,000 times and no longer needed to think about it consciously. Walsh watched this and said quietly, but not quietly enough, "He's just going to pull what we already pulled." "Then he'll find what you already found," Marcus said from his position near Jack, which apparently wasn't enough to start the engine. Walsh said nothing. Noah had the side panel off. He looked at the exposed components for a moment, not touching, just looking. Then he reached into the engine with 2 fingers and felt along something the crowd couldn't see. A component buried deep in the assembly, something you'd need to know was there to look for. He pulled his fingers out and looked at them. There was something on his fingertips, a residue, something dark. Hey, Walsh stepped forward. Don't just touch things without a plan. You could damage. I'm not going to damage anything, Noah said. He wasn't sharp about it. He wasn't defensive. He said it the way someone states a fact about the weather. There's residue on the fuel line, old, probably been building up for a while. Walsh stopped. We checked the fuel line, Dennis said. You checked the fuel flow, Noah said. Did you check the interior wall of the line itself? The buildup doesn't block the passage completely. It just restricts it enough to cause inconsistent performance. Not enough to stop the engine normally, but combined with something else. He stopped. Combined with what? Jack said. Noah was quiet for a moment. His hand went back inside the engine, feeling different. Something else is wrong, he said. Give me a few more minutes. The crowd had moved closer without anyone deciding to do it. The 300-person gathering had drawn inward over the last 10 minutes, people stepping toward the motorcycle without quite realizing they were doing it, pulled by something they couldn't name. The mechanics who had been spread around the area were all watching now. Even the ones who had their arms crossed and their expressions set in professional skepticism were watching. Noah reached for the compression gauge. He worked methodically. The crowd watched him check components that the other mechanics had checked, but there was a difference in how he did it that was hard to articulate. He was building something, each step connected to the last, following a path that seemed to have an internal logic the observers couldn't quite see yet. 5 minutes passed, then 8, then 10. The 10-minute window Jack had given him came and went, and Jack didn't say anything. And nobody else pointed it out, because the parking lot was too quiet for interruption. 12 minutes after Noah had started, he stood up. He was holding something between his thumb and forefinger. It was small, barely visible at a distance, but the people closest to him could see it clearly, a small piece of metal, shaped deliberately, obviously not something that belonged where it had been. The crowd didn't understand immediately what they were looking at. Noah looked at Jack. The problem wasn't one thing, he said. His voice was steady. No drama, just information. It was 3 failures happening at the same time. Walsh made a sound. 3 failures. Yes. Working together. Separately, Noah said. And together. You could fix any one of them, and the engine still wouldn't run right. All 3 had to fail at once to cause what happened on the road. Jack looked at the piece of metal between Noah's fingers. What is that? This is number 2, Noah said. This is the one someone put there on purpose. The parking lot went very still. Jack stepped forward. He looked at the metal piece. He looked at Noah. He looked back at the metal piece. Say that again, he said quietly. Noah held it up. This was placed inside the fuel system, he said. It's deliberately shaped to restrict fuel flow only under specific engine conditions. Under normal riding conditions, the engine would work fine inconsistently. Maybe you'd notice small problems, but it would run. But under sustained high-speed conditions, like a long highway stretch, the engine shuts down, Marcus said slowly. Like someone turned a switch, Noah said. Jack looked at the piece of metal for a long time without speaking. Around him, the crowd was processing this in stages. The immediate reaction was silence. Then very quietly, a rising murmur that started nearest to the motorcycle and spread outward as the information traveled through the gathering. Someone had sabotaged Iron Jack's motorcycle, not broken it, not damaged it through neglect or accident, intentionally placed a component designed to cause a specific failure at a specific moment, designed to kill the engine on a highway. Walsh was staring at the piece of metal with an expression that had moved through several stages of skepticism and arrived somewhere more complicated. Where exactly did you find that? He said. Noah described the location precisely. Walsh's expression shifted again. He turned to Dennis and said something quietly. Dennis turned to his toolbox and retrieved a diagram. Walsh studied the diagram for a moment, then looked up at Noah with an expression that had for the first time abandoned skepticism entirely. We didn't go that deep, Walsh said. I know. We were looking at the accessible components, the usual suspects. I know, Noah said, but the problem wasn't accessible. It was buried. Jack reached out and Noah placed the small piece of metal in his palm. Jack looked at it. He turned it over once, turned it again. 3 failures, he said. The third one is the bearing, Noah said. The crankshaft bearing has microscopic damage. You can't see it. You can barely feel it if you know exactly where to look and what you're feeling for. But under the right vibration conditions, it affects the timing in a way that compounds the other 2 problems. Microscopic, Walsh said. Yes. How did you identify microscopic bearing damage without diagnostic equipment? Noah was quiet for a moment. You feel it, he said. The vibration pattern changes. There's a specific frequency when you rotate the shaft manually that's different from what a healthy bearing produces. It's subtle. You'd miss it if you weren't specifically listening for it. Walsh looked at Jack. Jack was still looking at the metal piece in his palm. Someone put this here, Jack said. Yes, someone who knows this engine. Noah didn't answer. That wasn't his question to answer. He'd found the evidence. The conclusions it led to belonged to someone else. The crowd had gone very quiet again. Not the curious quiet of earlier when they were watching a young mechanic work on a famous motorcycle. This was a different quality of silence. The kind that settles over a space when something serious has just been confirmed. Because this was no longer just a mechanical challenge. Someone had reached into Jack's most important possession and put their hand on it. The mechanics had all stopped working. The diagnostic equipment was idle. The digital tablets had been put away. Every eye in the parking lot was on the small piece of metal in Iron Jack's hand and on the 20-year-old who had found it in 20 minutes when 80 professionals had spent 7 hours finding nothing. Walsh spoke first, and to his credit, his voice was level. If there's really a bearing problem, we need a press and the right replacement component. I don't know if anyone here has a crankshaft bearings for a 85 Softail. I do, said a voice from the back of the crowd. An older man worked his way forward. He was maybe 70, weathered face, white hair, wearing a vest with 40 years of patches on it. He moved with the specific slowness of someone whose knees had been through too much, but whose presence still commanded space. His name was Victor Hale. Victor had been building and rebuilding Harley engines since before most of the mechanics at this rally had been born. He didn't have a famous shop or a magazine profile. He had, over the course of 4 decades, become the kind of mechanic that other mechanics talked about in the way people talk about someone they've heard legends about but never quite expected to meet. He stopped in front of Noah. He didn't look at the motorcycle. He looked at the old screwdriver still sitting on top of Noah's toolbox. He reached down and picked it up. He turned it over. He read the initials carved into the handle. S.B. Victor Hale went very still. He looked at Noah. Where did you get this? He said. His voice was quiet. Careful. The way voices get when they're afraid of the answer. It was my grandfather's, Noah said. Victor looked at him for a long moment. What was your grandfather's name? Samuel, Noah said. Samuel Bennett. The change that moved through Victor Hale's face was something the crowd nearest to them would remember for a long time. It wasn't a dramatic expression. It was something quieter, a recognition settling into old bones, something that looked like grief and wonder arriving at the same moment. Samuel Bennett, Victor said. He said it like the name itself had weight. You knew him, Noah asked. I knew him, Victor said. He looked at the screwdriver in his hand. 45 years ago, Samuel Bennett was the best mechanic I had ever seen, and I had seen a lot of mechanics. He paused. He could hear things in an engine that nobody else could hear. I watched him diagnose problems that stumped everyone else in the room, and he did it the way you just did, by touching the machine and listening. The crowd was absolutely silent. Walsh was staring. Dennis had stopped moving entirely. He never got the recognition he deserved, Victor continued. He was still looking at the screwdriver. He was from the wrong part of Michigan, didn't have connections, didn't care about marketing himself. He just cared about the work. Victor looked up at Noah. I lost track of him about 20 years ago. I heard he passed. 11 years ago, Noah said. Victor nodded slowly. Did he teach you? Every afternoon, Noah said. Until I was 15. After school. All weekend. Everything I know about engines I learned from him. Victor handed the screwdriver back. He turned to face the crowd, all of them, the 300 people standing in that desert parking lot. This man's grandfather, Victor said, his voice carrying, was one of the finest mechanical minds this country has produced. He never got rich off it. He never got famous. He just worked on machines and tried to pass what he knew down to the people around him. Victor looked back at Noah. Apparently, he passed it down pretty well. For the first time in this entire afternoon, Noah's expression changed. Not much. He wasn't someone who showed emotion in large, visible ways. But something moved through his face, a tightening, a catching, the look of someone who has been carrying a name carefully for years and has just heard someone else say it out loud with respect. He looked away quickly. Jack had been watching all of this without speaking. He looked down at the piece of metal in his hand. He looked at his father's motorcycle. He looked at the 20-year-old standing next to it. "Can you fix it?" he said. Noah looked at the engine. He picked up his notebook and opened it to a fresh page. He wrote something quickly. He looked at the engine again. He wrote something else. "Yes," he said. "If Victor has the bearing and someone can get me clean solvent for the fuel line, I can fix it." "I've got the bearing in my truck," Victor said. "I've been carrying one for 30 years. Never seemed right to get rid of it." Nobody asked him why. Walsh looked at Dennis. Dennis looked at Walsh. Something passed between them. Not surrender exactly, but the thing that comes before surrender, which is recognition. "We've got solvent," Walsh said finally. "What grade?" Noah told him. Walsh turned to retrieve it without another word. The crowd began to reorganize itself around the motorcycle, but differently now. Not the loose gathering of spectators watching professionals work. Something more focused. Something that felt if you'd been watching groups of people long enough to read the difference, like witnesses gathering for something they understood was significant. Jack stepped back. He stood next to Marcus. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked. Jack was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that my father would have known who that kid was in 30 seconds. And I'm thinking that he would have already handed him the wrench." Marcus watched Noah settle back into position beside the motorcycle toolbox, open notebook beside him, Victor Hale crouching at his shoulder like a man who has just found something he thought he'd lost. "You think he can actually do it?" Marcus said. Jack looked at his father's motorcycle. "I think," he said, "that the only person in this parking lot who was actually listening to that engine was a 20-year-old kid who'd learned everything he knows from someone most of these people never heard of." He paused. "Yeah," Jack said. "I think he can do it." The desert sun was moving toward afternoon. 300 people stood around the motorcycle in the kind of silence that only happens when a crowd has collectively decided that what they're watching matters. And Noah Bennett opened his notebook, found the page he needed, and began. Noah worked the way his grandfather had taught him to work, which meant he never rushed, and he never guessed, and he never moved his hands faster than his mind could follow. The crowd around him had stopped. Being a crowd of strangers, it had become something else, a gathering of people who understood at a level below words that they were watching something rare and who had collectively decided without discussing it that they were going to stay until it was finished. Victor Hale crouched 3 feet to Noah's left, close enough to see every move but far enough to give the younger man room. Victor hadn't said much since identifying himself, but his presence had a weight to it that changed the atmosphere around the motorcycle. The professional mechanics, Walsh and Dennis, and the others had not left. They had pulled back slightly the way experienced people do when they recognize they're no longer the most knowledgeable person in the room, and they watched with the specific attention of men who were learning something whether they wanted to or not. Walsh had brought the solvent Noah requested. He'd done it without commentary, setting it down beside the toolbox without making eye contact. And Noah had said thank you without looking up, and that was the entirety of their exchange. Something had shifted in the dynamic between them, and both men understood it, and neither one needed to talk about it. Jack stood back with Marcus. He hadn't moved from that position since giving Noah the space to work. He was watching his father's motorcycle the way you watch something that holds a piece of your life invited with a kind of fierce attention that costs you something every minute it continues. "You want coffee?" Marcus asked. "No." "You want anything?" "I want that engine to start," Jack said. Marcus nodded. He didn't offer anything else. Noah had the fuel line disconnected and was working on clearing the interior buildup with a precision that made several of the mechanics near the front of the crowd shift uncomfortably. The technique he was using wasn't complicated, but the patience it required, the absolute refusal to hurry through a step, because the next step seemed more important, was not something that could be taught in a classroom. You either had it or you didn't. He's not rushing, Dennis said quietly to Walsh. I see that. We were rushing, Dennis said, this morning. We all came in with ideas about what the problem was, and we went looking for the thing we expected to find. Walsh was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, we did. Noah set the cleaned fuel line aside and picked up his notebook. He read something he'd written, then looked back at the engine, then wrote something new. He did this without any self-consciousness, as though the notebook were simply a conversation he was having with himself about the machine, a dialogue that had been ongoing for his entire working life. The crowd watched him write in the notebook. It was such an ordinary thing, a young man writing in a notebook, that several people found themselves unexpectedly moved by it. There was something about the simplicity of it. This kid had come to the most impressive gathering of motorcycle expertise in the country with a worn toolbox and a handwritten notebook, and he was the one who had found what none of the expensive equipment could locate. An older woman standing near the back of the crowd, the wife of one of the senior chapter members, a woman named Diane who had been coming to rallies for 35 years, turned to her husband and said quietly, "He reminds me of the men from the old days." Her husband, a man named Frank, who had ridden with the chapter for 3 decades, watched Noah for a moment. "Yeah," Frank said, "he does." That observation moved through the crowd the way Victor's earlier words had moved through it, not loudly, not with an announcement, but as a recognition that spread from person to person and settled over the gathering like something that had been waiting to be named. Noah reached back into the engine. What he was reaching for now was deeper, the bearing Victor had described, buried in the crankshaft assembly, in a place that required a specific approach to access without damaging surrounding components. He had his left hand inside the engine, and his eyes closed again, and the crowd, which had learned by now that this was not performance but methodology, went quiet without anyone telling it to. "What's he doing?" someone near the back asked. "Feeling the shaft rotation," Victor said without looking up. His voice carried easily in the silence. "Manual rotation test. You rotate the shaft slowly and feel for the point where the bearing doesn't move cleanly. You can feel that with your hands. If you know what you're looking for," Victor said. "Most people don't know what they're looking for. They check for obvious resistance, obvious grinding. The kind of damage this bearing has is subtler than that. It's a," Victor paused, searching for the right word, "a hesitation, like something wants to catch but doesn't quite. You'd miss it if you were expecting something more obvious." "How do you learn to feel something like that?" Victor looked over his shoulder at the person who had asked. It was a young man, maybe 25, who had come to the rally with his father and had never taken his eyes off Noah since the kid first crouched beside the motorcycle. "You spend a lot of time with machines and you learn to stop expecting them to be loud about their problems," Victor said. "Most failures start quiet. They get loud eventually, but by then the damage is done. The skill is hearing the quiet part." He turned back to watch Noah. "Samuel Bennett understood that better than anyone I ever met," Victor said, half to himself. Noah's hands stilled. He'd found it. The crowd knew, though no one could have said exactly how they knew. Something in the change of Noah's posture, a slight settling, the specific quality of stillness that comes when a searching hand finds what it's looking for, communicated itself without words. Noah opened his eyes. He looked at Victor. "Right rear section of the inner race," Noah said. "The hesitation is subtle, but it's there. About 20 degrees of rotation." Victor's expression did something complicated. "That's exactly where I'd expect it," he said slowly. "Is that significant?" Jack asked. He had moved slightly closer without realizing it. Victor looked up at him. "It's significant because that location on the bearing is associated with a specific kind of stress pattern," Victor said. "Not normal wear, not highway stress." He paused. "Impact stress, like someone put concentrated force on the shaft at that exact point." The silence that followed was a different quality than any silence that had preceded it. Jack's jaw tightened. "You're saying someone damaged the bearing deliberately," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm saying the wear pattern is consistent with that," Victor said carefully. "I'm not saying I can prove it. I'm saying that if I were trying to cause a specific delayed mechanical failure on this engine, the kind of failure that would look like age-related deterioration to anyone who did know exactly what to look for, this is where I'd apply force and this is how much I'd apply." The crowd absorbed this. The sabotage had gone from one piece of metal in a fuel system to something more comprehensive. Someone hadn't just dropped a foreign component into the fuel line and hoped for the best. If Victor was right in the way the older mechanics in the crowd were nodding, suggested they thought he might be someone had planned this. Multiple points of failure, each one subtle enough to be missed individually, designed to work together toward a specific outcome. An engine dying on a highway at speed. Jack thought about Route 89 at dusk. The engine stopping. The silence where the sound had been. He thought about what would have happened if he'd been going faster. If he'd been in a curve instead of a straight section. If he'd been on a section of road with no shoulder. Marcus put a hand on Jack's arm, not restraining, just present. "One thing at a time," Marcus said quietly. Jack nodded. His face had gone very still, the particular stillness that people who knew him had learned to recognize as the expression he wore when he was containing something large. "Fix the motorcycle," Jack said to Noah. "We'll deal with the rest after." Noah looked at him for a moment. He seemed to understand the weight of what Jack had just said, the deliberate choice to focus forward, to put the larger anger somewhere it could wait, while the immediate task was completed. Noah nodded once. He turned back to the engine. The next part of the work was the most technically demanding. The bearing needed to come out, and this was not a simple extraction. The component was seated deep in the assembly, surrounded by other parts that would need to be moved and then repositioned with precision. Victor had the replacement bearing in a canvas pouch he'd retrieved from his truck. It was wrapped in a cloth that had been rewrapped many times over many years, the kind of careful storage that only happens when someone considers an object important enough to protect for decades. "Why did you carry that for 30 years?" Dennis asked Victor. He was standing close enough now to hear the older man's quiet comments, and the professional skepticism he'd arrived with had been completely replaced by something that looked straightforwardly like fascination. Victor looked at the bearing in his hand. "Samuel Bennett told me 45 years ago that the most vulnerable point on this engine configuration was the crankshaft bearing, and that the failure mode most people missed was inner race damage from lateral stress," Victor said. He said if he ever needed someone to fix a bearing like that, he wanted to know there was someone out there who had the right part and knew how to install it. Victor paused. He was talking about his own bikes, but I kept the bearing anyway. I don't know why exactly, it just felt like the right thing to do. He held it out toward Noah. Noah took it carefully. He turned it over in his hands the way you turn over something that has been waiting a long time to be used for the purpose it was made for. "He never knew you kept it," Noah said. "No," Victor said. "I never told him. I should have." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have tracked him down and told him a lot of things." There was a grief in Victor Hale that the crowd near him could feel, not a fresh grief, but the old kind, the kind that comes from decades of not saying things you meant to say and then running out of time to say them. Noah looked at the old man for a moment with an expression that was steady and understanding, and that did not offer false comfort. "He knew," Noah said. "He talked about you." He said. Noah stopped. He seemed to be selecting the right words. He said some mechanics work on engines and some mechanics understand engines, and that the difference matters more than most people realize. Victor looked at him. He said you were one of the ones who understood," Noah said. "He said that's rare enough that it's worth remembering." Victor turned away. He looked at a point in the distance for a moment, his jaw working slightly, and then he turned back, and the expression on his face had settled into something resolute. "Then let's finish this," Victor said. The extraction of the damaged bearing was something the crowd would have been hard-pressed to describe afterward because there was very little to see. It happened mostly inside the engine, accomplished through careful maneuvering that required more patience than force. Noah worked slowly, and Victor occasionally offered a quiet word. Not instruction, more like confirmation. The way someone who trusts another person's competence offers small acknowledgments that what's being done is being done right. "Angle it left first," Victor said once. "Already did," Noah said. "Then pull on the exhale." A pause. "Got it." The damaged bearing came out. Victor took it from Noah and examined it. He showed it to Walsh, who leaned in and studied the inner race. Walsh straightened up. He looked at Noah. He looked at Jack. "It's exactly what they said," Walsh reported. "The damage pattern it's not road wear. It's not vibration fatigue." He turned the bearing over. "This was done intentionally." The certainty of that word intentionally landed on the crowd like something physical. Intentionally, not an accident, not age, not the accumulated wear of 30 years on American roads. Someone had looked at Jack's most important possession and made a decision. A decision to take it apart from the inside slowly, in ways that couldn't be easily detected, in ways designed to cause a specific failure at a specific moment. Jack reached out and took the bearing from Walsh. He looked at it for a long time. The crowd was completely silent. "Who knew about the bike?" Marcus said. He pitched his voice for Jack alone, but the silence around them meant it carried. "A lot of people," Jack said. "Who knew it well enough to do this?" Jack's fingers closed around the damaged bearing. "That's the question," he said. He held it a moment longer, then gave it back to Walsh. He turned to Noah. "Keep going," Jack said. Noah was already reaching for the replacement bearing. The installation required the same patience as the extraction. The component needed to be seated precisely oriented, correctly pressed into position with even force across the entire race. The wrong technique would cause the new bearing to fail the same way the old one had, just through damage rather than sabotage. Noah worked without rushing, checking the seating twice, rotating the shaft manually after each adjustment to verify the movement pattern had changed. Walsh watched this process with his arms folded and his head slightly tilted, the posture of a man rethinking something fundamental. "He's doing it right," Walsh said to Dennis. It wasn't meant to be heard broadly, but in the silence it was. "Yeah," Dennis said. "The technique on the installation. That's correct. That's the approach for this specific bearing configuration." "Where did he learn it?" Walsh looked at Dennis. "Same place he learned everything else," Walsh said, "from someone who knew." The new bearing settled into position. Noah rotated the shaft. The movement was different. Clean. Even. The hesitation that had been there before the subtle catch at 20 degrees of rotation was gone. "There," Noah said. Victor leaned in and put his own hand on the shaft rotating bit. His eyes closed briefly. "That's right," Victor said. His voice was quiet. "That's exactly right." Something released in the crowd, not quite a sound, not quite a movement, but a collective exhale of attention that had been building since 7 that morning. Walsh straightened up and looked at Dennis and didn't say anything, but his expression said enough. Noah moved on to the fuel system. The sabotage component, the piece of metal Jack still had in his pocket, had left trace effects in the surrounding fuel pathway. Noah worked through the cleaning methodically using the solvent Walsh had brought, working from the contaminated section outward, verifying the flow pathway at each stage with a simple pressure test before moving forward. He's checking his own work. The young man near the back, the one who'd asked Victor how you learned to feel a bearing problem, observed to his father. His father, who had been riding motorcycles for 30 years and understood what he was watching, nodded. "He's not assuming the last step was right just because he did it right," the father said. "He's verifying. That's the mark of someone who cares more about the outcome than about being seen to be confident." The son thought about that. "Most people want to look like they know what they're doing," the father continued. "He just wants the engine to work." Across the crowd, without any announcement, a shift was happening. It had been happening gradually since Victor Hale picked up the screwdriver and read the initials on the handle, a slow reorientation in how the assembled people understood what they were seeing. The 20-year-old with the dirty jacket and the old toolbox had arrived in their world looking like someone who didn't belong. He looked like a mistake. He looked like the kind of person you moved aside efficiently and without cruelty because he was in the wrong place. And now the crowd was confronting the specific discomfort of realizing that the mistake had not been his. Walsh felt it most acutely because Walsh had been the first barrier, the man who had stepped in front of Noah and told him registration was closed and this wasn't a school project. Walsh was a competent mechanic. He knew it and the people around him knew it, but he'd made a judgment call in the first 10 seconds of meeting Noah Bennett, and that call had been wrong in a way that was now visible to hundreds of people. He was thinking about that. He was thinking about all the times over his career when he'd made the same call, and it hadn't been visible because the person he'd assessed incorrectly had walked away, and he'd never found out what they were capable of. How many times Walsh was thinking, did I see the jacket in the old toolbox and decide I already knew what was inside? Noah finished with the fuel system. He sat back on his heels and looked at the notebook again, running down the page with one finger checking against his own notes. What else? Jack asked. He had moved close again, not hovering, but present, the way you stand near something that matters to you when someone else is working on it. I want to check the ignition timing, Noah said. Not because I think it's wrong, because with these three failures working together, the timing may have been affected by the compensations the engine was making in its last weeks of running. Compensations, Jack repeated. Engines adapt, Noah said. He was looking at the ignition components now, hands moving precisely. When something is wrong in one system, the overall function adjusts to compensate, not intentionally, not consciously, but mechanically. The combustion timing, the fuel-air mixture, the spark sequence, they all interact. If the fuel flow was being restricted and the bearing was creating vibration interference, the engine would have been running in a compensated state for weeks. When we fix the primary problems, that compensated state might cause issues if we don't account for it. Jack absorbed this. My father would have understood exactly what you just said, he said. Noah looked up at him briefly. I know he would have, Noah said. The engine his hands built, the tolerance, he chose the components he selected, they're not accidental. He understood how these systems interact. This engine was built by someone who knew what they were doing. Jack was quiet for a moment. He spent 8 months building it, Jack said. In his garage. I watched him on weekends. He'd talk to the parts while he was working. I thought it was funny when I was a kid. He paused. I understand it now. Noah looked at him. What did he say? Noah asked, when he talked to it. Jack thought about it. He'd say, tell me what you need, Jack said, like the machine could answer him. Noah looked back at the engine. It can, Noah said quietly. It just takes a while to learn the language. Walsh heard that. He didn't say anything. But he heard it and he thought about the 7 hours he'd spent that day not listening. Diagnostics, running, schematics, open theories being tested and rejected and replaced with new theories. All of it conducted in the confident language of professional expertise. And a kid with a notebook had walked up and listened. The ignition timing was slightly off, as Noah had suspected. Not dramatically, not in a way that would be immediately obvious, but enough that left uncorrected, it would have created problems after the primary repairs were made. Noah made the adjustment with the care and precision that had characterized every step of his work since he'd opened the toolbox. Victor watched the timing adjustment and nodded once slowly. 3 degrees, Victor said. 3.5, Noah said. Victor looked at him. 3.5, Victor confirmed. I was rounding. Something passed between the old mechanic and the young one, an acknowledgement that didn't need words. Victor had been doing this for 50 years and he'd rounded. Noah, 20 years old with an old notebook and a grandfather's tools, hadn't. Your grandfather didn't round either, Victor said. Noah kept working. The fuel line reconnection was last. Noah seated the line, tightened the connection to the torque spec he'd noted in his notebook, a spec he'd derived from the feel of the threading, not from a manual, because the original threading on a 30-year-old motorcycle had been worked enough times that the factory spec would over-tighten and then step back. He looked at everything he'd done. He opened the notebook and went through each item. Fuel line cleared, reconnected pressure, verified. Fuel system, foreign component, removed pathway. Clean flow restored. Crankshaft bearing, extracted new bearing, installed rotation, verified. Ignition timing, adjusted 3.5 degrees. He closed the notebook. He looked at Victor. Victor had been watching him go through the checklist. Anything? Noah asked. Victor considered. You checked the ground on the ignition circuit? Victor asked. Noah opened the notebook, found the page. Yes, third item 20 minutes ago. What did you find? Clean, no corrosion, good contact. Victor nodded. What about the throttle cable tension? It was slightly high. I adjusted it when I was working on the timing. It's in the notes. Victor studied him for a moment. You're done, Victor said. Noah exhaled. It was the first moment in the 2.5 hours he'd been working on the motorcycle where Noah Bennett looked like a 20-year-old. In that exhale was every minute of those 2.5 hours, the concentration, the care, the continuous awareness of how much depended on getting each step right. He wasn't the person everyone had laughed at when he walked up. He'd stopped being that person about 40 minutes in, but he was still 20 years old, and he'd just completed the most significant piece of work of his life in front of 300 people, and for just that 1 second, it showed. Walsh saw it. Walsh, who had 45 years of experience in a successful shop and a magazine profile, looked at the 20-year-old standing next to the motorcycle he'd just repaired. and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He would have called it humility if he were being honest, and he was trying to be honest with himself right now because the situation demanded it. He stepped forward. "Bennett," he said. Noah looked at him. Walsh was quiet for a moment. He seemed to be deciding something. "The fuel line cleaning technique you used," Walsh said, "that's not in any of the standard manuals for this engine model." "I know," Noah said. "Where does it come from?" "My grandfather developed it," Noah said, "for this specific configuration of the 85 fuel system. He found that the standard approach didn't reach the buildup in the curved section of the line. It cleans the straight sections, but the curve holds residue. His technique gets the curve." Walsh looked at the fuel line. He stopped. He looked at Noah. "That's actually a significant improvement on the standard approach." "He submitted it to a magazine once," Noah said, "about 30 years ago. They didn't publish it." Walsh's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't mind," Noah said. "He said if he could teach it to enough people directly, it would get into the world eventually." He paused. "He taught it to me. Now you know it." Walsh stood there for a moment. Then he did something that surprised the people who knew him. He extended his hand. Noah shook it. "Garrett Walsh," Walsh said. "I know who you are," Noah said. "Yeah," Walsh looked at him steadily. "I owe you an apology for this morning." Noah shook his head slightly. "You didn't know." "That's not an excuse," Walsh said. "I didn't know because I didn't take 30 seconds to find out. That's on me." The people nearest to them heard every word of this exchange. It moved outward through the crowd, the same way everything else had moved outward today, quietly person to person, until a significant portion of the 300 people gathered in that Arizona desert knew that Garrett Walsh had apologized to the kid he'd dismissed that morning and had done it straight without softening it. Several of the other mechanics who had spent the day working on the motorcycle and who had at various points added their own versions of dismissal to the kid's reception, a glance, a turned shoulder, a comment made quietly to a colleague, were doing their own silent accounting. Jack had watched the handshake. He looked at Marcus. "Didn't expect that," Marcus said. "Walsh is a good man," Jack said. "He made a mistake and he knows it. Good men do something about it." Noah had turned back to the motorcycle. He stood in front of it and looked at the engine, looked at everything he'd done and everything that had been done to it before he arrived, and his expression was the focused, quiet expression of someone who has completed a task and is doing a final mental review. He looked at Jack. "It's ready," he said. The parking lot went completely still. Jack moved toward the motorcycle. The crowd, which had been shifting and murmuring in the low register of 300 people doing 300 small things, went silent the way it had gone silent at key moments throughout the afternoon, suddenly, collectively, as though a switch had been thrown. Jack stood beside the motorcycle his father had built. He looked at it for a moment. He thought about his father standing on the porch watching him ride down the street and back. He thought about the look on his father's face that day. He thought about Route 89 at dusk and the silence that had replaced the engine sound and the way that silence had felt like losing something. "Before you try it," Noah said. Jack looked at him. "The first start after a repair like this, the engine will sound different for about 30 seconds, Noah said. "Not wrong, just different. The fuel system is clean, the bearing is new, the timing is corrected. The engine has been compensating for weeks. It needs 30 seconds to find the right rhythm without the compensation." He paused. "Don't kill the engine in those first 30 seconds. Let it run." Jack looked at him. "You sound like him," Jack said. "When you talk about it that way, you sound like my father." Noah was quiet. "I'll take that," he said. Jack climbed onto the motorcycle. The crowd around them was 300 people packed so tightly that the outermost ring of them was standing on their toes trying to see over the people in front. The professional mechanics were in the front rows. Walsh and Dennis standing side by side watching. Victor Hale standing to the right, his arms loose at his sides, his expression one of absolute stillness. Noah stood 3 feet from the front of the motorcycle. He was looking at the engine. Jack turned the key. Nothing. The crowd absorbed this in silence. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. Jack looked at Noah. "Sometimes the fuel system needs a moment to pressurize after being cleared," Noah said. His voice was completely level. "Try again." Jack turned the key. The engine coughed. A single cough, not a start, not a failure, but something in between. a sound like the machine was clearing its throat after a long silence. The crowd flinched slightly at it, the collective physical response to a sound that was almost what they needed it to be but wasn't quite. Jack looked at Noah again. Noah's eyes were fixed on the engine. "Once more," Noah said. Jack turned the key. The engine caught. It wasn't a roar, not yet. It was a deep, unsteady rumble, the sound of a machine waking up and not being sure of itself, and for 5 seconds it was the only sound in a 300-person gathering in an Arizona desert. And then it steadied. The rumble deepened and found its rhythm, the specific rhythm of a Harley-Davidson engine that has been built by hands that understood what it was supposed to sound like, a sound that people who love motorcycles recognize the way people recognize a voice they've been waiting to hear. The engine ran. It ran the way it was supposed to run, clean, strong, with the particular resonance of a motor built for the long road, and now for the first time in 3 weeks, running on all its cylinders with nothing fighting against it. Victor Hale closed his eyes for just a second. Walsh's arms unfolded from his chest and dropped to his sides. Dennis made a sound, not quite a word, just a sound, the involuntary vocalization of a held breath releasing. Jack sat on the motorcycle with the engine running under him. He put both hands on the handlebars. He felt the vibration, the living, purposeful vibration of a machine doing exactly what it was built to do. And he thought about his father's hands, the hands that had assembled this engine in a garage over 8 months. The hands that had touched every component that Noah had just repaired. The hands that had understood this machine the way the 20-year-old standing in front of him now understood it. He didn't close his eyes. He kept them open. He looked at Noah. Noah was watching the engine with an expression that was at its core simply professional, the careful attention of someone verifying that what they built or repaired is working correctly. But underneath that expression was something else. The look of someone who has carried a weight for a long time and has just set it down, not because the weight has disappeared, but because they have done something with it that makes the carrying mean something. The engine ran. It ran, and the desert air around it filled with the sound of it, and the 300 people who had gathered in that parking lot began to understand, in the specific and irreversible way, that understanding works when it arrives through the ears and the hands and the chest. Before it arrives in the head, that what they had spent the last 3 hours watching was not a repair. It was a conversation. A conversation between a grandson and the grandfather who had taught him everything, conducted through the medium of a 40-year-old engine built by another man who also understood the language of machines. And the engine spoke, and it said, "I'm still here." The engine had been running for 40 seconds when the first motorcycle in the crowd answered it. It wasn't planned. Nobody signaled anyone. One biker near the left edge of the gathering reached down and turned his own key, and his engine came to life. And then the man beside him did the same. And within 30 seconds, the sound had multiplied across the parking lot, the way sound multiplies, when people who love the same thing hear something that moves them and respond the only way they know how. Engine after engine catching, the deep rolling thunder of 100 Harleys joining the voice of the one that had been silent for 3 weeks, filling the desert air with a wall of sound that you felt in your sternum before you heard it in your ears. Jack sat in the middle of all of it with his hands on the handlebars of his father's motorcycle and let it happen around him. He didn't rev the engine. He didn't speak. He just sat there while the sound built and built until the parking lot was a living thing made of noise, and he felt the vibration of the machine under him, the specific, irreplaceable vibration of this engine. His father's engine, the one that had been silent and was now speaking again, and he let himself feel everything he'd been holding at a distance for the last 3 weeks. Marcus watched him from 6 feet away and didn't say a word. Noah stood where he'd been standing since the engine started, 3 feet in front of the motorcycle. His hands at his sides, his toolbox closed at his feet. He was watching the engine with the careful attention he had maintained throughout the entire repair, listening for anything that told him the work wasn't complete. But what he heard was right. What he felt in the vibration that reached him even at this distance was right. The engine was running the way it was built to run, clean and strong, and without the subtle wrongness that a compromised machine carries in its sound. Victor Hale stood beside him. The old man had his arms folded across his chest and his eyes fixed on the running engine, and his expression was the expression of someone who has just watched something happen that they will remember for the rest of their life. Samuel would have loved this, Victor said. He said it quietly, nearly to himself, nearly swallowed by the surrounding sound. Noah heard it anyway. Yeah, Noah said. He would have. They stood there together, the old mechanic and the young one in the middle of the noise, and neither of them needed to say anything else. It was Walsh who broke the surface first. He moved through the crowd until he was beside Jack, waited for Jack to acknowledge him, and when Jack looked over, Walsh said, "We need to talk about what we found." Jack nodded. He didn't kill the engine immediately. He let it run for another full minute, not for any mechanical reason, just because he needed the sound. Then he reached down and turned the key, and the engine went quiet, and the 100 motorcycles that had started in response went quiet too, one by one, until the parking lot settled back into the low ambient noise of a large gathering. Jack climbed off the motorcycle. He turned to face Walsh. "Talk," Jack said. Walsh looked at the piece of metal still in Jack's hand. Jack had held it the entire time through the repair. Through the starting, through the last 4 minutes of the engine running, he hadn't put it down. "That component," Walsh said, "I've been thinking about it since Noah pulled it out. That's not something someone fabricated quickly. That's precision work, custom shaped, designed specifically for this fuel system configuration." "Meaning it took time," Marcus said. "Meaning it took knowledge," Walsh said. "You don't make something like that without understanding the system you're putting it into. You need to know the exact internal dimensions of the fuel pathway, the specific conditions under which the restriction would activate the threshold at which the engine would fail, versus just run rough." Walsh looked at Jack. "This was made by someone who has worked on this engine before, someone who knew it well." The three men were quiet for a moment. Around them, the crowd had compressed again, people sensing that something important was being discussed, moving closer without quite knowing why. "How long?" Jack said. "How long what? How long would something like that take to design and make?" Walsh thought about it. "If you knew the system well, a few hours to design, another few to fabricate if you have the right equipment." He paused. "But the knowledge prerequisite, knowing the system well enough to design the restriction correctly, that's not something you pick up in an afternoon. That comes from time with this specific engine." Jack turned the piece of metal over in his hand. "Who's had time with this engine?" Marcus said. It wasn't a question. The silence that followed had a specific quality, the kind that falls when a group of people is thinking the same thought and none of them wants to be the first one to say it. Victor Hale, who had been standing slightly behind Noah, stepped forward. "Can I see it?" he said. Jack held it out. Victor took the metal piece and held it up, turning it in the light, examining the edges, the shape, the precision of the machining. His expression changed. Not dramatically, Victor was not a dramatic man, but something in his face shifted, a subtle tightening around the eyes, the look of recognition, arriving at a destination it hadn't expected to reach. "What?" Jack said. Victor turned it over again. He looked at a specific edge, the machined edge along one side that had been shaped to create the restriction in the fuel pathway. "This edge work," Victor said slowly, "the angle on this restriction surface. What about it?" "It's a specific technique," Victor said. "Not common. There's a particular way of cutting this kind of precision surface on soft metal that produces this exact angle and finish." He turned the piece so Jack could see the edge. "I've seen this finish before." The crowd that had moved close enough to hear this exchange had gone very still. "Where?" Jack said. Victor looked up. 12 years ago, he said. "A mechanic did work on a friend's bike, similar vintage, similar fuel system configuration. The custom components he made had this same edge treatment, same angle, same finish quality." "Who?" Jack said. Victor was quiet for a moment. He looked at the piece of metal in his hand. He looked at Jack. "His name is Ray Cutter," Victor said. "He ran a shop in Scottsdale. He called it a restoration shop, but what he actually specialized in was—" Victor paused, choosing the word. "Modifications. Custom work that clients wanted done quietly. He had a reputation for being able to get inside a machine and change things without leaving obvious evidence." The parking lot was silent enough now that the desert wind was audible. Jack's expression had not changed in the external way that some people's expressions change when they receive information that affects them. His face stayed still, but something happened in his eyes, a specific focusing, the kind that comes when something diffuse and threatening suddenly acquires a name and a shape. "Cutter, Chiggy," Jack said. "You know him, bro?" Marcus asked. I know of him, Jack said. His voice was even, controlled. He came to us 8 months ago, said he wanted to sponsor the chapter rally, offered a significant amount of money. Did you take it? No. Jack looked at the metal piece. Something felt wrong about it. I couldn't explain what. I just said no. He was quiet for a moment. He didn't take that well, Jack said. He made some comments, nothing I took seriously at the time. Marcus looked at him. And about 6 weeks ago, Marcus said slowly, wasn't your bike in for maintenance at Callahan's, Jack said. Callahan's was the chapter's private shop named after Jack, though it was managed day to day by a rotating crew of trusted members. 6 weeks ago, standard pre-rally maintenance. Who did the work? Jack was quiet. 3 people, he said. People I trust. And who came through the shop during that time? Another silence. Jack reached up and rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture so small and uncharacteristic that Marcus, who had known him for 22 years, registered it the way you register a tiny crack in a wall of a building you thought was solid. Cutter came by, Jack said. He said he wanted to talk again about the sponsorship. I wasn't there. Whoever was at the shop that day let him in to wait. He paused. He waited about 20 minutes and then left when he found out I wasn't coming in. 20 minutes. Nobody said it, but everyone who was listening was thinking it. 20 minutes alone or nearly alone in a shop where Jack's motorcycle was sitting open after its maintenance work. You're not sure he was actually alone in there, Marcus said. I need to talk to the people who were there that day, Jack said. Walsh had been listening to all of this without speaking. He spoke now. I want to be careful about accusations, Walsh said. What Victor has identified is a stylistic similarity in machining work. That's significant, but it's not proof. Before this goes further, I'm not going to do anything with it today, Jack said. He looked at Walsh steadily. I understand what it is and what it isn't. What I'm doing right now is building a picture. He closed his fingers around the metal piece again, and the picture is getting clearer. Noah had said nothing during any of this exchange. He'd been standing slightly apart from the group, his toolbox back in his hand, giving the conversation the space it needed. He was watching the engine of the motorcycle, not monitoring it anymore, just looking at it the way you look at something you've spent a long time working on and have just finished. Jack turned to him. Everyone's attention followed. The parking lot, 300 people, professional mechanics, 40 years of rally tradition. All of it went quiet in the specific way it goes quiet when the person everyone has been watching all afternoon is about to be addressed by the person everyone else defers to. Jack walked toward Noah. He stopped in front of him. He was 6 inches taller than the kid and 25 years older and carried 3 decades of authority in the way he moved, and none of that mattered in the way it usually mattered because the last 2.5 hours had made the hierarchy between them something other than what had appeared on the surface. Jack looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then he said, You didn't fix a motorcycle. Noah looked at him. You brought back a piece of my family, Jack said. The words were quiet. They were said without performance. They were said by a man who did not say things he didn't mean and who had just said the truest thing he knew how to say. Noah held Jack's gaze. He didn't deflect. He didn't minimize. He understood the weight of what was being said, and he received it without flinching. Your father built something worth fixing, Noah said. Jack's jaw moved slightly. He reached out and put his right hand on Noah's left shoulder. Not a pat, not a brief contact, but a grip, the kind that communicates something that doesn't have words in most people's vocabularies. Then he pulled the kid into a hug. It was not a backslapping, brief, masculine acknowledgement hug. It was the kind of hug that a man gives when the emotion is large enough that the alternative is letting it come out some other way. Jack held it for 3 full seconds, and Noah, who had spent 2.5 hours being absolutely composed in front of 300 people who had fielded dismissal and skepticism, and the weight of everyone's expectations with perfect steadiness, stood there and let himself be held. And his free hand came up briefly and gripped the back of Jack's vest. 3 seconds. Then they stepped apart. The crowd reacted not with noise, but with movement, a physical shift, a collective leaning the way people move when they feel something and their bodies respond before their minds catch up. Walsh was looking at the ground. Dennis had taken a step back. Victor Hale had turned slightly away, and his shoulders had the set of a man managing an emotion he hadn't expected. Marcus Delaney, who had ridden with Jack through 22 years of everything this life could produce, was standing perfectly still with his arms at his sides, and the expression on his face was one that the people who saw it would think about for a long time. The moment ended the way real moments end, not with a cue, not with a signal, but simply by being complete. Jack straightened up. He looked at Marcus. "Get me on the phone with whoever was at the shop 6 weeks ago," he said. His voice was back to what it normally was, level direct, carrying the weight of decision. "Tonight." "Done," Marcus said. Jack looked at Walsh. "I want a written account of what Victor identified about that component. Accurate, specific, no overstatement." Walsh nodded immediately. "I'll have it within the hour." Jack looked at Victor. "Would you be willing to give your account directly, not just the written version?" Victor met his eyes. "Whatever you need," the old man said. "Samuel Bennett's grandson fixed your father's motorcycle. That makes this personal to me." Jack nodded. He turned back to the motorcycle, his father's motorcycle, the one that had been silent for 3 weeks, and that was now warm from running the engine, ticking quietly as it cooled in the way engines tick when they've been used properly, and he looked at it for a long moment. "Put out the word," Jack told Marcus. "Everyone who came here to see if the bike could be fixed, they're staying for dinner. Chapter's providing. All 300? "All 300, Jack said, "and Noah eats at my table." It was Dennis who started moving first through the crowd, spreading the word about the dinner, and the information moved outward, the same way everything had moved today, person to person, quiet and fast until the whole gathering knew. But before the crowd began to disperse toward the dinner arrangements, something happened that nobody had quite anticipated. The young man near the back, the 25-year-old who had been asking Victor questions throughout the afternoon, who had watched every step of Noah's work with the focused attention of someone trying to memorize what they were seeing, worked his way through the crowd until he reached Noah. He stopped in front of him. Noah looked at him. "My name is Cole," the young man said. "My father's been riding for 30 years. I've been helping him work on his bike for about 10. I'm not a professional. I've never done any formal training." Noah waited. "I watched what you did today," Cole said. "The way you went through the diagnostic, the order of it, He stopped searching for the right words. "The way you checked your own work. Every step. The way you used the notebook." "Okay," Noah said. "I've never seen anyone work like that," Cole said. "I mean, I've watched professionals. Walsh's crew, no offense, I watched them this morning. And they know what they know. But there was something different about your approach. It felt like you were having a conversation with the machine." Noah looked at him for a moment. "That's what my grandfather called it," Noah said. "He said you're not working on an engine, you're working with one. The distinction matters." Cole absorbed this. "He taught you everything by working alongside him." "Every afternoon for years," Noah said. "No manuals, no formal instruction. He'd work and he'd talk, and I'd watch and listen, and eventually I'd do, and he'd watch and talk." Noah paused. "It's a slow way to learn, but what you learn goes deep. Is that the only way to learn it that way?" Noah looked at him steadily. "No," Noah said, "but it's the best way I know, because what you're actually learning isn't a technique. It's a way of paying attention." He picked up his toolbox. "The techniques change. The attention is the same thing every time." Cole stood there for a moment. His father had come to stand beside him, and his father had heard the exchange, and his father was looking at Noah with an expression that Cole, who knew his father well, had rarely seen on him. "Samuel Bennett," Cole's father said. "My father knew Samuel Bennett, from Michigan." Noah looked at him. "Your grandfather worked on my father's first bike," Cole's father said. "1972. My father always talked about the mechanic who fixed it, said he'd never met anyone who understood an engine the way Samuel did." He looked at Noah. "He said he talked to machines." Something moved through Noah's face. "Samuel Bennett and my grandfather were friends," Cole said, looking at his father. "Not friends exactly. They knew each other through the bikes. My father would bring anything broken to Samuel, and Samuel would fix it and refuse to accept anything but the cost of parts." He looked at Noah. "My father tried to pay him properly once, and Samuel said, 'The work is enough payment. I get to fix a machine. That's the deal.'" Noah was quiet. "That sounds like him," he said. "I'm Jim Harlow," the man said. He extended his hand. "My father's name was Dale." Noah shook his hand. "Dale Harlow," Noah said slowly. "My grandfather mentioned him. He said Dale Harlow brought him the most challenging carburetors he ever worked on and never apologized for it." Jim Harlow laughed, a sudden, genuine laugh, the kind that comes when a memory you haven't thought about in years lands on you unexpectedly. That sounds like my father, Jim said. He could break a carburetor just by looking at it. The three of them stood there for a moment, Noah and Jim and Cole, connected by a web of men and machines and knowledge that had traveled across decades and 1,000 miles to converge in a parking lot in Arizona. Victor Hale, who had drifted near enough to hear this exchange, spoke. "This is what Samuel understood that most people didn't," Victor said. "He used to say that knowledge passed between people is worth more than knowledge kept in books, because when it passes between people, it carries the person with it. You learn the technique and you learn the man." He looked at Noah. "I learned things from Samuel that I've carried for 45 years, Victor said. "Things I've passed on to mechanics I've worked with. Things I know are still in circulation somewhere because of him." He paused. "He never had a shop with his name on it. He never had a magazine article. But there are engines running today and machines all across this country because of what he understood and what he shared." The weight of that settled over the small group of them. Noah and Victor and Jim Harlow and Cole and the dozen people who had gathered close enough to hear. "His name should be on something," Cole said. He said it simply, without agenda, just the observation of a young man who had spent the afternoon watching the expression of a legacy. Nobody disagreed. The dinner was held in the rally's main gathering area, and it was the kind of dinner that happens when something real has occurred and people want to stay near it. The food was secondary. What people were actually consuming was the shared experience of the afternoon, telling each other what they'd seen, comparing what they'd noticed, finding words for the things that had moved them. Noah sat at Jack's table as Jack had said he would. To his left was Victor Hale. To his right was an empty chair that Jack filled when he came to the table after making the calls. He needed to make calls that his expression when he returned suggested had been productive and disturbing in roughly equal measure. He sat down. He picked up the cup in front of him. He looked at Noah. "I talked to the three people who were at the shop 6 weeks ago," Jack said. The table went quiet. Walsh was 2 seats down. Marcus was across from Jack. Victor was listening. "2 of them were in the back working when Cutter arrived," Jack said. "The third, a prospect named Danny Reyes, let Cutter in and stayed out front with him." He paused. "Danny left to take a phone call. He was gone about 10 minutes. When he came back, Cutter was still in the waiting area." 10 minutes alone, Marcus said. 10 minutes, Jack confirmed. "The phone call," Walsh said. "Was it a real call?" Jack looked down on him. "Danny says it came in on his cell. Someone asking about a part. He didn't recognize the number. He thought it was a customer." Jack set his cup down. "I'm going to find out whose number it was." The table understood what that meant. If the call had been arranged, if someone had called Danny Reyes at a specific moment to clear him from the front of the shop for exactly long enough, then this wasn't an impulsive act of sabotage. It was coordinated, planned down to the level of managing who was in the room at the right moment. "That's a significant operation for someone who's just angry about a sponsorship rejection," Walsh said. "It is," Jack agreed, "which tells me this isn't just about the sponsorship." Victor had been quiet throughout this exchange. He spoke now. "Ray Cutter has wanted to be affiliated with this chapter for a long time," Victor said. "Longer than the sponsorship conversation 8 months ago. I've heard his name in connection with the chapter going back 3-4 years. Jack looked at him. "Why?" "Because association with this chapter carries weight in the motorcycle world," Victor said. "Especially in Arizona. Shops that have your endorsement, even informal endorsement, see their business change. Cutter has been trying to position himself as the go-to restoration specialist for vintage bikes in this region for years. He's competent. He knows what he's doing. But he hasn't been able to break into the upper tier because the people in the upper tier don't vouch for him. And if we'd been unable to fix the motorcycle," Marcus said slowly, "and Cutter happened to appear with a solution, he becomes the man who saved Iron Jack's most important possession," Jack said. "He gets the endorsement he couldn't earn any other way." The table sat with that. It was Walsh who voiced the thing everyone was thinking. "He didn't count on a 20-year-old kid showing up with his grandfather's toolbox," Walsh said. A silence. Then Marcus made a sound that was almost a laugh. "No," Marcus said, "he did not." Jack looked at Noah. Noah had been listening to the entire conversation without speaking, absorbing, processing, doing the same thing he had done with the engine, which was refusing to rush to conclusions before the picture was complete. You're thinking something, Jack said. Noah looked at him. I'm thinking about the bearing damage, Noah said. What about it? The bearing damage was the hardest component to identify, Noah said. It took me longer than the other two. If you were designing a three-part failure, you'd put the hardest to find element in there for a reason, to ensure that even if someone found the other two problems, they'd still miss one and the repair would still fail. The table was quiet. Cutter knew what he was doing, Noah continued. The fuel restriction was obvious enough to be found if someone dug deep enough. The timing effects would be identified by a thorough mechanic. But the bearing damage at that location with that failure pattern, a lot of experienced mechanics wouldn't look for it in that configuration, because it looks like age-related wear. But you looked for it, Walsh said. My grandfather told me about that bearing location 30 times, Noah said. He said it was the hidden vulnerability in this engine design. He said the people who really knew this engine knew about it, and the people who didn't know about it were the ones most likely to miss it when it failed. Victor looked at Noah sharply. Samuel said that he said it every time we worked on an engine with this configuration. Victor's expression shifted. Samuel identified that vulnerability 40 years ago, Victor said slowly. He wrote it up. He submitted it to the technical journals twice. Both times he was rejected. The editors said the failure mode he was describing was too specific to a narrow range of conditions, meaning almost nobody knew about it, Marcus said. Almost nobody, Victor agreed. The people who knew about it were the people that Samuel taught directly the people who worked alongside him. He paused. And apparently the people who knew about it well enough to exploit it. Jack leaned forward. Cutter, he said. Victor nodded slowly. Ray Cutter came through Michigan about 25 years ago. He spent time in the same circles Samuel moved in. He was younger, probably in his late 20s at the time. He had a gift for vintage engines. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. Samuel spent time with him, taught him, the way Samuel taught everyone who showed genuine interest. The table went very quiet. Cutter learned about the bearing vulnerability from my grandfather, Noah said. It wasn't a question. I believe so, Victor said. Yes. Noah looked at the table for a moment. When he looked up, his expression was something the people at the table hadn't seen on him before. Throughout the afternoon, through the dismissal, through the technical challenge, through the discovery of the sabotage, through the repair, and the starting of the engine, Noah had been composed. Steady. The particular steadiness of someone who had been trained not to let the external noise interfere with the internal work. But this was different. This was the face of someone who had just learned that the knowledge his grandfather had shared in the same spirit in which it had been shared all his life, generously without expectation of return, in the belief that knowledge between people travels better than knowledge in books, had been taken and turned into a weapon. Someone had sat beside Samuel Bennett and received what Samuel had to give. And then they had used it to break something that mattered. He used what my grandfather taught him, Noah said, to damage something your father built. Jack looked at him. Yes, Jack said. The word landed. Noah nodded once slowly. He looked at the table. My grandfather would have said something about that, Noah said. His voice was level, but it had a quality to it now that hadn't been there before, something held very carefully like an object that could break. He had a thing he used to say about people who take knowledge and use it against the people who gave it. What did he say? Jack asked. Noah was quiet for a moment. He said that kind of betrayal always costs more than it earns, Noah said, because what you're spending is not your own. The table was silent. Walsh looked at the tablecloth. Marcus looked at Jack. Jack looked at Noah. 300 people were moving through the space around them, eating, talking the ordinary noise of a large gathering, and the table at the center of all of it was an island of silence. I want him found, Jack said quietly. He said it to Marcus. Marcus nodded. I want him found properly, Jack continued. I want what Victor knows and what Walsh can document and what the phone records show are all put together the right way. I'm not doing this in a parking lot. He looked around the table. I'm doing this correctly. And when it's done, there won't be any question about what happened or who did it. Walsh nodded. Victor nodded. Noah was looking at the table and didn't respond immediately. Then he looked up at Jack. You said earlier I didn't fix a motorcycle, Noah said. That's right. What you said was I brought back a piece of your family. That's what I said. Noah looked at him steadily. Then what Cutter tried to do wasn't just sabotage a bike, Noah said. He tried to take something from you that can't be replaced, something that belongs to you and your father and the 30 years between you. Jack held his gaze. He didn't succeed, Jack said. No, Noah said. He didn't. A pause. I need you to know something, Noah said, about why I came to this rally today. Jack waited. I've been rejected from 17 shops in the last 2 years, Noah said. I applied everywhere I could think of. Some of them didn't call back. Some of them interviewed me and saw the jacket and the old toolbox and made their decision. One of them told me directly that they wanted mechanics with formal credentials. He picked up his coffee cup. I came here because I read about the challenge, about your motorcycle, and I thought. He stopped, started again. I thought if there's one place in this country where what I know will be enough, it's here, at an event where people who love machines come together and the machines are what matter. He set the cup down. I didn't come here to build a career, Noah said. I came here because I thought if I could fix that engine, if I could do the thing I was taught to do in front of people who understood it, then at least once what I know would be seen for what it is. The table was completely still. Jack looked at him for a long time. Then he said, Did your grandfather ever tell you about having a place to work, a shop of your own? Noah looked at him. He talked about it, Noah said carefully. He said every mechanic who loves the work deserves a place where the work is the only credential required. Jack looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him. Something passed between them, the silent communication of two men who have known each other long enough to hold entire conversations in a glance. Jack looked at Noah. I have a proposition for you, Jack said, and I want you to hear the whole thing before you respond. Noah nodded. Jack leaned forward, his forearms on the table, his voice dropping to the register he used when he was saying something that mattered and wanted it heard precisely. The chapter has a private workshop, Jack said. We use it for maintenance on chapter bikes and for restoration work on machines that are important to us. We've been looking for someone to run it for 2 years, someone who understands vintage engines at a level that most professional mechanics don't. He paused. We haven't found that person. Noah was listening with the same quality of attention he brought to engines. I'm not offering you a job as an employee, Jack said. I'm offering you a partnership. You run the workshop. You set the standards. The chapter provides the space, the tools, the resources. You provide the knowledge. He looked at Noah steadily. And when you're ready, if you want it, we help you establish your own shop, under your name, the way your grandfather's knowledge deserves to be under a name that people can find. Noah was quiet. Walsh had stopped moving entirely. Dennis, 2 seats down, was staring at the table with the expression of a man recalculating something significant. Victor Hale had both hands flat on the table and was looking at Jack with an expression that was simply gratitude. That's a large offer, Noah said, for a 20-year-old with an old toolbox. It's an accurate offer, Jack said, for the person who heard what 45 years of professional expertise couldn't hear. He sat back. I don't make offers based on age or toolbox. I make them based on what I've seen. He reached into his pocket and set the sabotaged metal component on the table between them. I've seen enough, Jack said. Noah looked at the metal piece. He looked at Jack. He looked at Victor. Victor nodded once, the specific nod of someone who has thought about something for a long time and has arrived at a conclusion they're confident in. Noah picked up the metal piece. He turned it over. He thought about his grandfather in the garage in Michigan, talking to engines in the afternoon light, saying things that a child thought were funny and that a 20-year-old now understood were the most serious things Samuel Bennett knew how to say. He thought about 17 rejections. He thought about the road between Michigan and Arizona, the road that had felt long and uncertain, and that had delivered him here to this table, to this conversation with this man's father's engine running warm in the parking lot outside. He set the metal piece back down. I have one condition, Noah said. Jack waited. The shop carries my grandfather's name, Noah said. Not mine, his. The table went still in a different way than it had gone still before. Not the stillness of surprise, but the stillness of something settling into exactly the right place. Jack looked at him for a moment. Then he extended his hand. Samuel Bennett's name, Jack said. On whatever we build. Noah shook his hand. Across the table, Victor Hale looked down at his hands. The old hands that had held a screwdriver for 45 years, that had once worked beside Samuel Bennett in Michigan, and had carried a bearing across decades in a canvas pouch because it had seemed like the right thing to do, and he was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up. Samuel always said the work outlasts the worker, Victor said. He said if you do it right and you teach it right, the knowledge keeps going after you're gone. He looked at Noah, then at Jack, then at the metal piece on the table between them. He was right. Outside, the desert had gone dark. Somewhere in the parking lot, a single motorcycle engine started. Not for any reason, just because someone wanted to hear it, and the sound carried into the gathering space, and through the walls and over the table where four men sat with the remains of a deliberate act of betrayal between them, surrounded by evidence of everything it had failed to destroy. The engine ran. It ran the way engines run when they've been fixed by someone who listened to them. And somewhere in that sound, if you were paying the right kind of attention, the kind Samuel Bennett had spent his life teaching, you could hear everything that mattered about the afternoon, not the sabotage, not the $30,000, not the professional credentials, and the diagnostic equipment, and the magazine profiles. You could hear a 20-year-old kid with his grandfather's tools doing the only thing he had ever really known how to do. Listening. The phone records came back at 11:17 that night. Marcus set his phone on the table in front of Jack without saying anything, and Jack picked it up and read what was on the screen, and the table what remained of it, which was Jack and Marcus and Victor and Noah and Walsh, the five of them still sitting, long after the dinner crowd had dispersed into the desert. Night went quiet in the specific way it goes quiet when information arrives that confirms what everyone already suspected, but hoped might be wrong. The number that had called Danny Reyes 6 weeks ago, the call that had cleared him from the front of the shop for 10 minutes, the call about a part that Danny couldn't identify, and that no follow-up order had ever been placed for that number, was registered to a business account. The business was called Cutter Restoration Works, Scottsdale, Arizona. Jack set the phone down. He looked at the metal piece still sitting on the table between them. There it is, Marcus said. Jack didn't respond immediately. He sat with it for a moment the way he sat with things that required a response proportional to their weight. Not rushing, not performing, calm, actually using the silence to think. That's a phone call to a prospect, Walsh said carefully. A man who works for the chapter. Using a business line. Using a business line that he presumably knew could be traced, Victor said. Or he didn't care, Noah said. Everyone looked at him. He didn't think he'd need to care, Noah said, because he didn't think anyone would ever identify the sabotage as sabotage. He designed the failure to look like accumulated mechanical wear. 3 separate failure points, each one plausibly attributable to age and road stress. If the motorcycle had been examined by a standard diagnostic process, which it was for 7 hours, the failure components would have been identified individually and treated as unrelated wear issues. He paused. The engine would have been pronounced unfixable or in need of a complete rebuild. Cutter would have appeared. He would have offered his services. And the repair he performed would have addressed all 3 issues because he knew exactly what they were. The table sat with this. He was never at risk of being caught, Marcus said slowly, because he built the failure to look like time did it. And he built the solution to look like expertise, Noah said. He would have fixed it in an hour, in front of whoever Jack brought in, and it would have looked like he understood the engine at a level nobody else did. Because he did understand it, Victor said. His voice carried something beneath the words, not quite anger, not quite grief, something older than both. Samuel gave him that understanding, and he used it to stage a magic trick. Jack's fingers rested on the table near the metal piece, but not touching it. He made one mistake, Jack said. He didn't expect Noah, Marcus said. He didn't expect someone who'd been taught the same knowledge from the same source, Jack said. He didn't expect that the vulnerability he exploited would be recognized by someone who knew it from the inside. He looked at Noah. Your grandfather taught you about that bearing location. 30 times, Noah said. Cutter didn't know Samuel had a grandson who listened, Jack said. Victor made a sound, not quite a laugh, something more complicated. The sound of a man who has lived long enough to see a certain kind of justice operate, and who recognizes it when it appears, and who finds something bittersweet in the recognition. Samuel always said, Victor started and then stopped. What? Noah asked. Victor looked at him. He used to say that the worst thing you can do with knowledge is hoard it, Victor said. He said knowledge kept to yourself dies when you die. Knowledge shared multiplies. He paused. He shared everything he knew with everyone who showed genuine interest. He didn't keep anything back. He taught Cutter the same things he taught me, the same things he taught Noah. He believed in the sharing. Victor's jaw tightened. He just didn't predict that one of the people he shared with would try to weaponize it. He couldn't have predicted that, Noah said. No, Victor agreed. He couldn't. And it wasn't a failure of judgment on his part. It was a failure of character on Cutter's. Jack picked up the metal piece. He held it for a moment. Then he set it down decisively and looked at Marcus. Tomorrow morning, Jack said, I want our attorney involved. I want everything documented, Victor's identification of the machining technique, the phone records, Walsh's written account of the component analysis, the bearing damage pattern. All of it. What's the legal exposure? Walsh asked. Intentional destruction of property, Marcus said. Potentially more, depending on how a prosecutor wants to characterize placing a device designed to cause mechanical failure in a moving vehicle. The table understood the weight of that characterization. A motorcycle failing on a highway at speed was not an abstract inconvenience. It was a man on a fast-moving machine suddenly without control on a road where other vehicles moved on pavement that offered no forgiveness for the unexpected. What Cutter had designed was not merely sabotage of property. What Cutter had designed was an event that could have killed someone. Jack said nothing about this. He didn't need to. Everyone at the table was thinking the same arithmetic. Get the attorney on the phone in the morning, Jack said. Tonight I want someone watching Cutter's shop. Marcus nodded once and pulled out his phone. Walsh stood up. I'll have the written account to you before midnight, he said. He looked at Jack steadily. And I want to say something. Jack looked at him. I've been doing this work for 45 years, Walsh said. I've seen a lot of mechanics and I've made a lot of assessments about people's abilities, and I've been wrong before, but not often and not usually in ways that were visible to a room full of people. He paused. Today, I was wrong in the most visible way possible, about the most important thing in the room. He looked at Noah. I told you this wasn't a school project. Noah looked at him. It wasn't, Noah said, but you didn't know that when you said it. That's exactly the problem, Walsh said. I didn't know it because I didn't ask. I made a judgment based on what I could see, and what I could see was a young man with old tools, and I filed him under a category and acted accordingly. He was quiet for a moment. I've done that to people my whole career. I'm just usually not in a parking lot with 300 witnesses when I do it. The honesty in this was so direct and undecorated that it created a moment of silence at the table. The kind of silence that falls when someone says exactly what they mean without softening it. Noah looked at Walsh for a moment. My grandfather got that his whole life, Noah said. Not just once, his whole life. Every time he walked into a new room, people saw what he looked like and decided what he was. He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, set it back down. He never stopped sharing what he knew. He never stopped teaching. He used to say that the people who dismiss you are the people you most need to be patient with because they're the ones most likely to need what you know eventually. Walsh absorbed this. He was a better man than most, Walsh said. He was, Noah said simply. Walsh extended his hand again. Noah shook it. Walsh left to write his account. The table was quieter now, 4 of them instead of 5, and the night outside had deepened, and the rally grounds were settling into the specific quiet of a large outdoor event after the people have dispersed the distant sounds of engines and conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter from somewhere far enough away to be ambient. Victor looked at Noah. Can I ask you something? Victor said. Yes. 17 shops turned you down. Yes. In 2 years. In 2 years. Victor was quiet for a moment. What kept you going, as he said, between the rejections, between the mornings when you woke up and there was another letter or another phone call or another manager looking at your jacket and making a decision? He looked at Noah directly. What kept you in it? Noah didn't answer immediately. He looked at the table for a moment, and his expression was the expression of someone going back into a place they'd spent some time in and hadn't entirely left. I had nowhere else to go, Noah said. And then before anyone could read that as defeat, I don't mean that the way it sounds. I mean, this is the only thing I know how to do at the level where it matters to me. I can do other things. I worked construction for 8 months. I worked a parts counter for a year. I can't do those things. He paused. But when I'm doing those things, I'm not doing the thing my grandfather prepared me to do. And there's a specific feeling that comes with not doing the thing you were built for. It's not dramatic. It's not despair. It's just wrong. The way of bearing running with damage feels wrong to someone who knows what right feels like. He looked at Victor. And I knew what right felt like, Noah said, because he taught me, and you can't unknow that. Victor looked at him for a long moment. Samuel taught me the same thing, Victor said. Not in those words, but the same thing. He taught everyone the same thing, Noah said. That's who he was. Jack had been listening without speaking. Now he spoke. Where are you staying tonight? He said. Noah looked at him. I've got a sleeping bag in my truck, Noah said. Jack looked at Marcus. Marcus was already reaching for his phone. You're not sleeping in your truck, Jack said. Not tonight. I don't need, Noah started. I know what you need and don't need, Jack said. What I'm telling you is what's going to happen. He said it without force, without the edge of a command. He said it the way you say things to someone you've decided to take care of, which is a different thing entirely. Marcus is going to get you a room at the hotel where most of the chapter is staying. You're going to sleep in a bed. Tomorrow morning, we're going to sit down, you, me, Victor, our attorney, and the shop manager, and we're going to talk about what the partnership looks like. Noah looked at him. You're moving fast, Noah said. I move fast when I know what I want, Jack said. I've known what I wanted since about 40 minutes into watching you work. He looked at Noah steadily. Do you have a reason to be somewhere else tomorrow? Noah thought about it. No, he said. Then we're doing this tomorrow. The room at the hotel was the kind of room Noah had not been in for 2 years. Not extravagant, but clean and warm, and with a bed that was a real bed. And when he sat on the edge of it in the quiet of 11:30 at night, the accumulated weight of the day settled onto him all at once with the specific heaviness that comes when the adrenaline of an event finally releases its hold on your body. He sat there for a moment. He had his grandfather's toolbox open on the floor in front of him. He hadn't opened it intentionally. His hands had done it without instruction, the way hands do things they've done 1,000 times. He looked at the tools, the worn wrench, the screwdrivers, including the one with SB carved into the handle, the compression gauge, the notebook now with today's pages filled with the notes he'd taken during the repair. He picked up the notebook. He opened it to the pages from today and read through them. Every step recorded in the small, precise handwriting that matched his grandfather's, because he'd learned to take notes by copying his grandfather's style, and the style had stuck. He closed the notebook. He thought about Victor Hale saying Samuel would have loved this. He thought about Jim Harlow saying his father always talked about the mechanic who fixed his first bike and refused to accept payment for the work. He thought about Jack saying, you didn't fix a motorcycle, you brought back a piece of my family. He thought about 17 rejections. He thought about the particular feeling of standing in front of a motorcycle that 80 professionals hadn't been able to fix, with the knowledge that he could fix it, and the specific quality of calm that had come over him in that moment. Not confidence, basically, not arrogance, just the steady certainty of someone who knows their task and is ready to do it. His grandfather had tried to prepare him for rooms that didn't want him in them. Samuel had said more times than Noah could count, the room not wanting, you doesn't change what you know. You walk in anyway. You do the work anyway. And eventually the room has to decide whether it wanted the work more than it didn't want you. 17 rooms had decided they didn't want him enough to find out what he knew. Today, a parking lot in Arizona had made a different decision. Noah closed the toolbox. He turned off the light. He slept better than he had in 2 years. The morning came fast. Jack's attorney was a woman named Christine Alvarez, who arrived at 8 in the morning with a legal pad, a coffee she hadn't started yet, and the particular focused energy of someone who has been doing serious work for a long time and has not lost her appetite for it. She was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed with the quality of attention that makes people feel simultaneously that they are being taken very seriously and that they should be extremely precise in what they say. She sat across from Jack at the table in the hotel's small conference room, which Jack had booked for the morning. Noah was to his left, Victor to his right, Marcus at the end. Walsh's written account was on the table in a printed form, 3 pages of precise technical documentation that Noah had read once and found completely accurate. Christine read through Walsh's account. She read the phone records Marcus had compiled. She read Victor's written statement, which Victor had produced at some point between midnight and 8 in the morning with a thoroughness that suggested he hadn't slept. She set all of it down. She looked at Jack. "This is solid," she said. "How solid?" "Solid enough to go to the police with today, if that's what you want to do." She looked at the phone records. "The call to your prospect from a registered business line is not subtle. Either Cutter is arrogant, or he made the call from a phone he didn't think could be traced, or he made a mistake." She paused. "In my experience, people who plan things carefully at the construction phase sometimes get sloppy at the execution phase because they've convinced themselves the plan is foolproof." "He thought the plan was foolproof," Marcus said. "He thought no one would identify the sabotage as sabotage," Noah said. "If no one identifies it as sabotage, there's no investigation. The phone call doesn't matter if no one's looking for a phone call." Christine looked at Noah. "You're the one who identified it," she said. "Yes." "How old are you?" 20. Christine looked at Jack. "The mechanic who cracked this is 20 years old," she said. Not skeptical, just making sure she had the facts right. "He's also the person who fixed the motorcycle," Jack said, "after 80 professionals couldn't." Christine looked back at Noah for a moment, reassessing something in the way people reassess when new information changes the picture. "Okay," she said. "Here's the situation. We have two distinct legal questions and they need to be handled separately." She picked up her legal pad. Question 1 is the criminal matter, the intentional sabotage of a motor vehicle. What Cutter placed in that fuel system, combined with the bearing damage, constitutes deliberate interference with a motor vehicle that was then operated on a public highway. Depending on how the DA wants to characterize it, you're looking at criminal mischief, potentially assault with a deadly weapon given the potential for harm during the highway failure, and possibly conspiracy if we can show the phone call was coordinated in advance. The table absorbed this. Question 2, Christine continued, is civil, the damage to the motorcycle, the cost of repair, pain and suffering, if we want to argue it, and potentially punitive damages given the deliberate nature of the conduct. She paused. Civil is easier to prove, lower standard, but criminal is the one that matters for what I assume is your actual concern. Jack looked at her. My actual concern is that a man put a device in my father's motorcycle that was designed to cause it to fail at highway speed, Jack said. His voice was even. My actual concern is what would have happened if the motorcycle had failed in a curve instead of a straight section, or if I'd been going faster. He paused. My actual concern is that this was designed to look like an accident. Christine nodded. I understand, she said. Then we go criminal. Today, if you want. Today, Jack said. Christine opened her laptop. While she began drafting, Victor leaned toward Noah and said quietly, How are you feeling? Noah looked at him. Strange, Noah said honestly. Strange how? Yesterday morning I drove to this rally with $40 in my pocket and a sleeping bag in my truck. Noah said, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to get inside. I didn't have a registration for the challenge. I thought I might have to talk my way past someone at the gate. You talked your way past Walsh, Victor said. That's more impressive. Yesterday I was trying to prove that I could do the work, Noah said. This morning I'm sitting in a conference room with an attorney and a chapter president and we're talking about criminal prosecution. He looked at the table. I'm trying to keep up with it. Victor looked at him with something that was close to affection, the specific kind that doesn't need to announce itself. You don't need to keep up with it, Victor said. You just need to keep being who you are. The rest of it is happening around you because of who you are. It'll keep happening that way. Noah thought about this. My grandfather said something like that once, Noah said. What did he say? He said if you do the work honestly and you do it right, the world eventually has to come to you, Noah said. He said most people don't believe that because the wait is long. He said the secret is that the wait is the work. Victor was quiet. The wait is the work, he repeated. He said every rejection is the work continuing, Noah said. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like nothing like empty time. But he said it's the part where you're being shaped for what's coming, and you can't know in advance what's coming, so you can't know which part of the wait is doing what. He looked at Victor. I held on to that, Noah said, through 17 rejections. I held on to it because I didn't have anything else to hold on to, and because it sounded right in the way things sound right when someone who understands the world tells them to you. Victor Hale sat for a moment. He was 70 years old and he had been in this business for 5 decades, and he had seen enormous amounts of talent recognized and enormous amounts of talent overlooked, and he had seen more times than he liked to count the specific cruelty of a world that frequently mistakes the container for the contents. He was right, Victor said, and you're evidence of it. Across the table, Christine Alvarez had stopped typing. She had been listening, not with the attention of someone who had abandoned her work to eavesdrop, but with the peripheral attention of someone who is doing one thing and processing another simultaneously. She looked at Noah for a moment. "The shop you agreed to last night," she said. "The partnership with the chapter." "Yes," Noah said. "You want your grandfather's name on it." "Yes." Christine looked at Jack. "I can draw up the partnership agreement this morning," she said, "while I'm drafting the criminal complaint. It's straightforward from a legal standpoint." Jack looked at Noah. Noah nodded. "Do it," Jack said. The morning moved quickly after that. Christine worked. Marcus coordinated with the police department a call that took less time than expected because it turned out the detective assigned to the intake was someone Marcus had dealt with before professionally and who understood what kind of information was being brought to him and how reliable it was likely to be. Walsh arrived at 9 with additional documentation. He'd spent part of the night pulling comparison records from his own files cases where he'd seen similar machining techniques, and while none of them pointed directly to Cutter, the pattern across Walsh's records supported the specificity of Victor's identification. "This is good work," Christine said, looking at Walsh's additional material. Walsh accepted this without false modesty or excessive acknowledgement. "It's accurate work," he said. "That's all I tried to make it." At 9:45, Christine set her laptop aside and picked up her phone. She made 2 calls. The first was to the Phoenix Police Department, where she spoke to the detective Marcus had already contacted, and she provided a concise, precise summary of the evidence that had been assembled over the last 18 hours. The detective asked several questions. Christine answered them. At the end of the call, the detective told her he would have officers at Cutter's Scottsdale shop before noon. The second call was to Cutter's business line. She put it on speaker. The table went quiet. It rang 4 times. "Cutter Restoration Works." A man's voice, confident, the voice of someone who runs a business and receives calls and is accustomed to being competent. "This is Christine Alvarez, attorney, calling on behalf of Jackson Callahan and the Arizona Hells Angels chapter," Christine said. Her voice was the same as it always was, direct, precise, without performance. "We'd like to discuss the work recently performed on Mr. Callahan's 1985 Harley-Davidson Softail." A pause. Not a long pause. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. But 2 seconds is a long time when you're listening for something. "I haven't worked on a Harley Softail recently," the voice said. "Of course not," Christine said. "We'd still like to talk. Our office can make itself available this afternoon if you'd prefer to meet with counsel present." Another pause. "I'll need to check my schedule," the voice said. "Take your time," Christine said. "We'll be here." She ended the call. The table was quiet for a moment. "He paused," Marcus said. "He paused twice," Victor said. "A man with nothing to hide doesn't pause when you mention the motorcycle," Christine said. She made a note. "He paused because he needed a second to calculate what we knew and how we knew it." She looked at Jack. "He's calculating right now." "Good," Jack said. "That first-take calculation usually produces a mistake," Christine said. "People in his position either reach out to an attorney immediately, which is the correct move, or they try to get ahead of it themselves, which is not." She capped her pen. "My experience says he'll try to get ahead of it." At 11:15, her phone rang. She looked at it. She looked at Jack. "Unknown number," she said. She answered. "Listen," said 4 words. "I understand. Hold on." She lowered the phone and looked at Jack. "He wants to talk," she said. "Not through an attorney, directly." Jack looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back. "He's scared," Marcus said. "He should be," Jack said. He thought for a moment. "Tell him we'll talk, here, tonight, with counsel present on both sides." Christine relayed this. There was a brief exchange. She ended the call. 7 o'clock, she said. "He'll have someone with him." "Fine," Jack said. Noah had been quiet through this sequence. He'd been listening the way he listened to everything with full attention, processing, not rushing to reactions. He spoke now. "You don't have to include me in the meeting tonight," he said to Jack. "This is between you and Cutter. I was the instrument of finding what he did, but the injury was to you." Jack looked at him. "You were also the thing he didn't account for," Jack said. "I want him to see you. I want him to understand exactly what undid his plan and why." Noah considered this. "All right," he said. The afternoon was quieter. The rally grounds were still active. The event ran 3 days and today was day 2, but the noise of it was background. Now the ordinary noise of a gathering rather than the focused intensity of the previous afternoon's events. Victor found Noah at the motorcycle which was parked among the other chapter bikes. Noah was crouching beside it, not working on it, just looking at it. His hand was resting against the engine casing, palm flat the way it had been when he first approached the motorcycle the previous afternoon. Victor said nothing. He stood beside him. "Still running, right?" Noah said. He said it without turning around because he'd heard Victor's footsteps and recognized them the way you recognize the footstep of someone you've been in close proximity to for 18 hours. "How do you know without starting it?" Victor said. "The metal's still warm from this morning when Jack ran it," Noah said. "Feel it." Victor crouched beside him and put his hand against the engine. The warmth was there, residual, fading the warmth of a machine that had been running and had held the heat. "The temperature distribution is even," Noah said. "No hot spots, no localized warmth that would indicate a component running hotter than it should." He moved his hand slightly. "If something were wrong with the repair, you'd feel an asymmetry by now." Victor felt the engine. He moved his hand the same way Noah's had moved. He was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. They both had their hands on the engine for a moment, the old mechanic and the young one crouching together in the way of people who speak the same language and don't need words when the thing they understand is available to be felt directly. "I want to ask you something," Noah said. He was still looking at the engine. "Ask," Victor said. "The bearing you carried for 30 years, Noah said. "The SB on the screwdriver. The things my grandfather told you that you've held on to for 4 decades. He paused. Why does knowledge stay with someone that way? Why doesn't it just fade, go away?" "Most things fade." Victor thought about this. "Because it was given honestly," Victor said. "Samuel didn't teach things because he wanted something back. He didn't teach so you'd owe him. He taught because the knowledge needed to go somewhere and you were where it could go." He took his hand off the engine and sat back slightly. When someone gives you something that way without strings, without calculation, it lands differently. It doesn't feel like information. It feels like trust. And you don't let go of trust the same way you let go of information. Noah absorbed this. He did it with everyone, Noah said. "That's why there's so much of him still in the world," Victor said. "You're not the only one carrying what he gave. I'm carrying it. Jim Harlow carried what his father told him about the mechanic from Michigan. Those mechanics Samuel taught in Detroit in the 80s, some of what they know came from him." Victor looked at the motorcycle. "He's distributed. He's in the machines that have been fixed correctly, and in the people who fixed them, and in the people those people taught." Noah was quiet. "He never knew any of that," Noah said. "People rarely do," Victor said. "That's not the point of giving well. If you give because you need to know the impact you're giving for your own sake. Samuel gave for the knowledge's sake." He looked at Noah. "That's rare. Most people can't do it. Most people need to see the result." "He would have loved today," Noah said again. He said it the second time differently than the first, not as an observation but as a statement of something he was certain of in his core. "He would have been watching from somewhere and telling you to stop getting emotional and check the timing on the ignition," Victor said. Noah laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in all of this, a real laugh, sudden and genuine. The laugh of someone who has just been shown an accurate portrait of someone they love. "That's exactly what he would have said," Noah said. Victor smiled, the specific smile of someone who held a memory and just heard it recognized. The 7 o'clock meeting arrived. Cutter came with an attorney, a younger man nervous around the edges in the way that young attorneys get when they've been retained on short notice for a situation they're still assembling the facts of. Cutter himself was in his early 60s, a compact man with graying temples and the weathered hands of someone who had spent decades with engines. He walked into the conference room with the specific controlled bearing of someone who had prepared themselves to appear calm and was managing it adequately but not perfectly. He saw Noah. Something happened in his face. It was brief, a flash of something that moved through his expression and was suppressed before it fully arrived. But it was there, the specific involuntary response of someone who recognizes a thing they did not expect to see. He had not expected Noah to be in the room. More than that, he had not expected anyone like Noah to exist in the context of this meeting. The plan had been clean, contained, directed at Jack and the chapter and the motorcycle. The discovery should have been made by professionals who would find what he'd put there and not find what he'd hidden. The plan had accounted for expertise. It had not accounted for legacy. It had not accounted for a 20-year-old who had been taught afternoon after afternoon in a Michigan garage the specific vulnerability of a 1985 Harley-Davidson crankshaft bearing by the only other person in the room who truly understood what Cutter had done. Cutter sat down. Christine opened the meeting with a factual summary, clean, precise, no rhetoric. The component, the phone records, Victor's identification of the machining technique, the bearing damage pattern, Walsh's documentation. She laid it on the table piece by piece, the way you lay cards down when you're not bluffing and want the other person to understand that you're not bluffing. Cutter's attorney leaned towards him and spoke in a low voice. Cutter listened. He looked at the metal piece Christine had placed on the table, the component Noah had extracted from the fuel system now in a clear evidence bag that Christine had obtained that morning. He looked at Noah. Noah looked back at him. Cutter looked at the metal piece again. His attorney said something else. Cutter shook his head. The attorney sat back. "Mr. Cutter would like to speak directly," the attorney said. Christine looked at Jack. Jack nodded. Cutter looked at Jack. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but the steadiness was the manufactured kind, the kind that costs something that is being maintained by effort rather than by the absence of something to contain. "I wanted to be part of this community for a long time," Cutter said. "I know," Jack said. "I spent 20 years building expertise that should have gotten me in. I know these machines better than most people alive." "I know that too," Jack said. "And you said no," Cutter said, without explanation, without... "I said no because something felt wrong," Jack said. His voice was even, not aggressive, not heated, the specific quality of calm that comes from certainty. "I've been leading people my whole adult life. I've learned to trust the feeling when something is wrong about a situation." "You were the wrong." He paused. "It took me until last night to understand exactly what the wrong was, but the feeling was right from the beginning." Cutter was quiet. "You learned what you know from Samuel Bennett," Jack said. Cutter looked at Noah. "Part of it," Cutter said. "The part that mattered for what you put in my motorcycle," Jack said. Cutter said nothing. "Samuel Bennett taught you a vulnerability in this engine design that he discovered himself," Jack said. "He taught it to you the same way he taught it to every person who sat beside him and showed genuine interest in learning. He gave it to you because he believed in giving knowledge freely." Jack leaned forward slightly. "And you used it to try to destroy the most important thing his grandson owns." The word grandson landed on Cutter in a visible way. He looked at Noah. For the first time, something in Cutter's expression abandoned the controlled presentation he'd walked in with. Something genuinely unprepared moved through his face. "His grandson," Cutter said. It wasn't a question, it was an arrival. "Noah Bennett," Jack said. "Samuel's grandson. The person who diagnosed your sabotage in 20 minutes because Samuel taught him the same things he taught you. Exactly the same things." Cutter looked at Noah for a long moment. Noah looked back at him. "He talked about you," Noah said quietly. "Not by name, he talked about students he'd had who had real talent. He talked about one specifically, someone who understood the mechanical intuition in a way that was rare. He said he hoped that person was still doing the work honestly somewhere." He paused. He said talent like that deserves to be pointed at something worth building. The silence in the room was the most complete silence of the entire 2 days. Cutter's jaw worked slightly. His attorney had stopped moving. Jack was watching Cutter with the steady, unblinking attention of a man who has decided to let the truth do the heavy lifting and is giving it room to work. Victor Hale, who had said nothing since sitting down, spoke. "Samuel believed in you," Victor said to Cutter. "He told me about you once. He said you had a gift. He said he hoped you'd find a way to use it that mattered. Victor's voice was not angry. It was not forgiving either. It was the voice of someone delivering information they wish they didn't have. He died not knowing what you did with what he gave you. Cutter looked at the table. He was quiet for a long time. His attorney leaned toward him again. Cutter held up one hand. He looked at Jack. "What do you want?" Cutter said. Jack looked at Christine. Christine opened her legal pad. "Full cooperation with the criminal investigation," she said. "A written and recorded account of all actions taken, the planning, the execution, the intended outcome. Full restitution for the cost of the repair and any associated costs. And a civil settlement that will be allocated at Mr. Callahan's direction to the establishment of a mechanical training program in the name of Samuel Bennett." Cutter looked at the last item. Something crossed his face that was hard to categorize. Not guilt exactly, because guilt is too simple a word for the expression of someone confronting the specific shape of their own wrongness. His attorney made a note. "That's agreeable in principle," the attorney said, "subject to documentation and also, there's one more thing," Jack said. Everyone looked at him. Jack looked at Cutter. "You're going to sit in this room tomorrow morning," Jack said, "and you're going to tell Noah everything Samuel taught you about this engine. Every technique, every insight, everything you took from him and kept." His voice was still even, still without edge, but it carried something underneath that was beyond argument. Because that knowledge belongs to this community, and it should have been circulating for 30 years instead of sitting in your shop being used to hurt people. Cutter looked at Noah. Noah looked back at him. The offer Jack had just made or demanded, depending on how you looked at it, was not something Cutter could have predicted walking into this room. It was not punishment. It was not mercy. It was something older than both, the specific correction that comes from a deep understanding of what the actual wrong was. The wrong wasn't the sabotage, not at its root. The wrong was someone taking knowledge given freely and closing it off, hiding it, using it for private gain, instead of letting it continue the circulation it had been given to continue. The correction was opening it again. Cutter looked at the metal piece in the evidence bag on the table. He looked at Jack. He looked at Noah. He nodded. His attorney said something quickly and quietly, and Cutter shook his head. "I'll cooperate," Cutter said, "on all of it." Christine wrote something on her legal pad. Jack sat back. He looked at Noah. Noah was looking at the evidence bag, the small piece of metal that had started all of this, the thing that had been designed to destroy something and had instead, through the chain of events it set in motion, caused the opposite of its intended effect. Noah picked it up. He turned the bag over once. He set it back down. He thought about his grandfather in the garage in Michigan, talking to machines, telling a 10-year-old child to put his hand on the engine and be quiet and listen. He thought about 17 rejections. He thought about a sleeping bag in a truck and $40 in his pocket in a parking lot in Arizona where 300 people had laughed at him and then gone silent. He thought about the engine running. He thought about Jack saying you didn't fix a motorcycle. And for the first time since that afternoon, since the engine had caught and deepened and steadied and filled the desert with the sound of something returning, Noah let himself believe fully and without qualification that the wait had been the work, exactly the way his grandfather had said, and that what was coming next had been built piece by piece in every hour of that long and difficult patience. Cutter came back the next morning at 8 o'clock. He came alone, no attorney. He'd called Christine the previous night and told her his attorney wouldn't be present for the morning session, and that he understood this created no legal obligation on anyone's part, and that he was coming anyway. Christine had relayed this to Jack. Jack had said fine. He sat across from Noah at the same conference table. Between them was Noah's notebook open to a fresh page and 2 cups of coffee that Marcus had brought in without being asked, and the specific quality of silence that exists between 2 people who have done something to each other and are now in the same room without the structure of a formal proceeding to organize the space. Victor was there. Jack was there. Marcus had stepped out to make calls about the criminal filing which Christine had submitted that morning to the Phoenix Police Department, and which was now moving through a process that would unfold over the next several weeks without requiring anything further from the people in this room today. Cutter looked at the notebook. "Where do you want to start?" he said. Noah looked at him. "Tell me what Samuel taught you first," Noah said. "What was the first thing he showed you?" Cutter thought about it. Carburetor synchronization on twin-cylinder configurations, he said. I was 26. I had a bike that ran rough at mid-range throttle and I'd taken it to 3 shops and nobody could fix it. Someone told me about a mechanic in Dearborn who was good with vintage engines. He paused. I drove 2 hours to find him in a garage behind a hardware store. He had the roughest workspace I'd ever seen. Tools everywhere. Coffee cans full of parts sorted in a system only he understood. Noah smiled slightly at this. He looked at my bike for about 30 seconds. Cutter continued. He didn't ask me what was wrong. He just listened to the engine while it was running, and then he reached in with a screwdriver and made 3 adjustments, and the roughness was gone. He stopped. Just like that. 3 adjustments, 30 seconds gone. I asked him how he knew, and he said the engine told him, Noah said. Cutter looked at him. He said the engine told him, Cutter confirmed. A moment passed between them, not reconciliation, not warmth, but something more complicated, the recognition of a shared origin. 2 people taught by the same man, shaped by the same hands, sitting on opposite sides of a table in Arizona, because one of them had taken what was given and used it badly. I went back every weekend for 2 years, Cutter said. He never asked me to pay him. I tried. He refused every time. He said the payment was that I'd learn it right and do it right. He looked at the table. He meant that. He was serious about it. I know, Noah said. I believed it at the time, Cutter said. The way he said it past tense, I believed it at the time, carried something that neither Noah nor Victor nor Jack interrupted with a response. They let it sit, because the full weight of that past tense was something Cutter needed to carry without anyone commenting on it. What changed? Victor said finally. Cutter didn't answer immediately. Nothing changed, he said at last. That's the honest answer. I didn't change what I believed. I let what I wanted matter more than what I believed. He looked at Jack. I wanted to be in this world, the real part of it, the part that matters. I'd been on the outside of it for 20 years building a reputation that was never quite enough because the people who mattered didn't know me and the people who knew me didn't matter enough to get me in. Jack said nothing. You said no, Cutter said, and I knew you were the door. I knew if Iron Jack Callahan said no, that was the answer, and there was no other door to knock on. He paused. And I had something. I had this one piece of knowledge, this specific understanding of this specific engine, and I thought if I could use it the right way, I could create a situation where you had to say yes. And you didn't think about what would happen on the highway, Jack said. Cutter was quiet. I told myself the failure mode was controlled, he said. I told myself the engine would die at low speed on a straightaway and you'd pull over and that would be it. You told yourself, Jack said. Yes. But you didn't know, Jack said. You couldn't know because you can't control where a motorcycle is when an engine fails. You can't control the speed. You can't control the road. Cutter's jaw tightened. No, he said. I couldn't. Jack looked at him for a long moment. My father built that engine, Jack said. He spent 8 months building it, every component chosen, every tolerance set, every connection made by his hands. His voice was still level. It would stay level. That was who Jack was. The emotion was there deep and real, but it was controlled the way the engine was controlled, directed through the right channels rather than released without aim. He built it, and I rode it for 30 years, and it was the last thing I had that he touched with his own hands. A pause. You knew that. You knew what it was before you touched it. Cutter didn't look away. Yes, he said. That's what I needed to hear you say, Jack said. Not the rest of it, that. The silence that followed was the final accounting, the moment when what had been done was acknowledged without softening, without excuse, face to face by the person who had done it and the person it had been done to. Then Jack said, talk to Noah. Give him everything Samuel gave you. He stood up. He walked out of the conference room. Marcus followed. Victor looked at Cutter. Then he looked at Noah. I'll be outside, Victor said. He left. Noah and Cutter sat alone. Noah opened his notebook. He uncapped his pen. He looked at Cutter. Start from the beginning, Noah said. Everything. Cutter picked up his coffee cup. He set it down. He began. What followed over the next 3 hours was unlike anything Noah had experienced in all the years since his grandfather died, and he had spent those years trying to recreate exactly this in every shop that turned him away, in every conversation with mechanics who were too busy or too confident to share what they knew. Cutter talked and Noah wrote, and the knowledge that moved across that table was Samuel Bennett's knowledge. The real thing, the deep thing. The understanding of machines that went below technique into something more fundamental. Cutter knew things Noah didn't know. That was the first thing Noah had to reckon with, and he reckoned with it honestly, which was the only way he knew how to reckon with anything. Cutter had spent 2 years beside Samuel and had spent 4 decades since then applying and building on what he'd learned, and there were refinements and extensions and discoveries in what he said that went beyond what Noah had been taught directly. Samuel had kept teaching after Noah stopped being in the garage every afternoon. The knowledge had continued to grow in the people who carried it, including the person sitting across the table, including Cutter. At a certain point midway through the morning, Noah set his pen down. Cutter stopped. "What?" Cutter said. "The timing compensation technique you just described," Noah said, "for twin-cam engines running with degraded fuel quality. What about it?" "My grandfather never taught me that," Noah said. Cutter looked at him. "He developed it about 18 years ago," Cutter said. "I was still in contact with him then. He called me out of the blue. I hadn't heard from him in months, and he wanted to talk through a problem he was working on. We talked for 2 hours." He paused. "It was the last time I spoke with him." Noah absorbed this. 18 years ago, 7 years before Samuel died. His grandfather had called Cutter a man who had sat beside him and learned from him to work through a problem, not because he needed the help, but because that was how Samuel Bennett engaged with knowledge. He talked it through with people who understood it. He didn't work alone if he could work in conversation. "He called you," Noah said. "Yes." "After years of not talking." "Yes." He said he'd been thinking about a problem, and he needed someone who understood the system well enough to push back on his reasoning. "Did you push back?" "3 times, Cutter said. "Mossy, he was right all 3 times. Noah picked up his pen. "Tell me the whole conversation," he said. Cutter told him. It took 40 minutes to tell it completely, because Cutter had apparently held that conversation in a specific part of his memory for 18 years held it. Noah suspected the way you hold something, you know you should have treated better. The technique that emerged from the 2-hour phone call between Samuel and Cutter was something Noah had never seen documented anywhere. It was the kind of refinement that exists only in the minds of people who developed it and the people they told. After today, it would also exist in Noah's notebook. "He trusted you," Noah said when Cutter finished. "Yes," Cutter said, "even after years of not talking." "He didn't talk about trust that way," Cutter said. "He didn't say, 'I trust you.' He just called and said, 'I've been working on something and I want to think it through with someone who understands the system.'" He looked at the table. That's what trust looked like with Samuel. He didn't announce it. He just acted from it. Noah was quiet. "You could have been that person," Noah said. "The person he trusted for the rest of his life." Cutter said nothing. He didn't need to. The thing Noah had just said was the true cost of what Cutter had done, and it was a cost that lived in a different register than criminal charges and civil settlements and restitution payments. Those could be satisfied. They had quantities. What Noah had just named had no quantity. It was simply the thing that was lost, and it was lost before the sabotage. Before the decision to use what he knew against someone else, it was lost in the moment. Cutter stopped trying to deserve the trust that was still being offered. "I know." "Oh," Cutter said. They were quiet. Outside the conference room through the wall, they could both hear the sounds of the rally continuing, the deep pulse of motorcycle engines. Voices, the ordinary ongoing life of 300 people gathered around the thing they loved. The ordinary world doing what it does, indifferent to the reckoning happening in one small room inside it. "My grandfather would want me to tell you something," Noah said. Cutter looked at him. "He'd want me to tell you that what you know is still worth something," Noah said. "What he gave you didn't become worthless because of what you did with part of it. The knowledge is still good. The understanding is still real." He held Cutter's gaze. "He wouldn't want you to stop working on engines. He'd say the work is still the right place for you. He'd say use it right from here." Cutter looked at him for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had lost the controlled bearing he'd arrived with and had become something more like what a person's voice sounds like when the management of their emotion has been going on long enough that it's stopped being manageable. "Why are you telling me that?" he said. "Because it's true," Noah said. And because my grandfather always told the true thing even when the easier thing was available. He looked at Cutter steadily. He taught me to do the same. Cutter nodded once. He looked at the table. He picked up his coffee cup and found it empty and set it down again. He didn't ask for more. For what it's worth, Cutter said. What you did yesterday, the diagnosis, the repair. He would have been proud, not just proud. He would have been, he stopped, started again. He would have recognized himself in it, which for Samuel was the highest thing. Noah absorbed this. He held it carefully the way you hold something that carries more weight than you expected. Thank you, he said. They sat for another moment. Then Noah closed his notebook. I think we're done, he said. Cutter nodded. He stood. He straightened his jacket in the automatic way of someone preparing to go back into the world. He looked at Noah one final time. The shop you're going to build, Cutter said. Samuel's name on it. Yes, Noah said. It'll be something, Cutter said. The right people will find it. He left. Noah sat alone in the conference room. He looked at the notebook full of today's pages, which were also full of yesterday's pages, which together contained more of his grandfather's knowledge than he'd had access to since the afternoon Samuel Bennett died in Michigan 11 years ago. He sat with that for a moment. Then he picked up the notebook and walked outside. The 3 months that followed moved faster than any 3 months of Noah's life, and also more deliberately because the two things are not contradictory when the work is right and the people around you understand what you're building. The chapter's private workshop was a concrete block building on the western edge of Phoenix, and it had been used for years as a maintenance facility that worked well, but had never been organized around a clear vision of what excellent mechanical work looked like. Noah walked through it the first time with Victor beside him and spent an hour looking at everything, the tool organization, the workflow, the way the bays were arranged, the lighting, and said almost nothing during the walkthrough, which Victor recognized as the same mode Noah entered when he was working on an engine, taking it in, listening before touching. At the end of the walkthrough, Noah turned to Victor and said, "It has good bones." Victor looked at him. "My grandfather used to say that about engines," Noah said. "I know," Victor said. "He used to say it about people too." They spent 3 days reorganizing the workshop before Noah worked on a single motorcycle. He built a tool organization from scratch, establishing a system based on workflow rather than category tools grouped by the sequence in which you reach for them during actual repair work, not by the logical taxonomy that looks correct in a manual but slows you down in practice. He labeled everything. He created a logging system for every machine that came through the door, a physical record in the same style as his notebook, because Noah believed in paper the way his grandfather had believed in paper, which was that a record you can hold in your hand is a record that will outlast the device that created it. Jack watched this process with the attention he brought to everything important, which was complete and unhurried. "You're building it the way he would have built it," Jack said on the second day. "I'm trying to," Noah said. He was reorganizing a section of the hand tool wall, moving things that someone had placed in a logical position to the position where they were actually needed. He always said the shop is the first tool. If the shop doesn't work, nothing else works right. He never had a shop of his own, Jack said. Noah stopped for a moment. "No," Noah said. "He worked in other people's garages his whole life. He made every one of them better, and then he left, and it went back to whatever it was before." He started moving things again. "I used to think that was sad when I was young. I thought, why doesn't he have his own place, his own thing with his name on it?" "What do you think now?" Jack said. Noah looked at the wall. "I think he knew that the name on the door wasn't the point," Noah said. "The point was the work. The point was what he gave to the people in the room with him." He turned to Jack. He'd want the name on the door now because it keeps the knowledge going. Not for himself, for the work. Jack looked at him. "You understand him?" Jack said. "I was raised by him," Noah said, "as much as by anyone." The sign went up 6 weeks after the rally. It was a weekday morning in November, and the desert air was cool for the first time in months, and the group that gathered outside the workshop was small. Jack Marcus, Victor Walsh, Dennis Cole Harlow, and his father Jim Christine Alvarez. A few chapter members who had been at the rally and who had told Noah in the weeks since that they were going to be there when the sign went up no matter what day it was. The sign was wood, not metal. Noah had chosen wood because his grandfather had always worked under wood signs in garages and backyard spaces, where someone had nailed a piece of board to the wall with the shop's name burned into it. Metal looked permanent. Wood looked like it had been made by a person, which was the point. Samuel Bennett Motorworks, black letters on weathered oak. Victor Hale stood in front of it for a long time without speaking. Jim Harlow put his hand on it, just for a moment, just a touch, the way you touch something that connects you to someone you've been thinking about for a long time. My father would have, Jim started. He stopped. I know, Noah said. Cole was standing beside his father, and his expression was the expression of a young man who is watching something that is going to stay with him, not because it's dramatic, not because anything theatrical is happening, but because it's true in a way that most things aren't. He had asked Noah 6 weeks ago to teach him. He had come to the workshop every weekend since then, and Noah had done with Cole what Samuel had done with Noah, worked and talked and let the knowledge pass between them through proximity and patience, rather than formal instruction. Cole was still a beginner, but he was a beginner who was already listening before touching, which meant he was starting from the right place. Walsh stood back slightly from the group. He'd driven up from Sacramento without being explicitly invited and had texted Noah that morning to say he was coming, and Noah had texted back one word, good. Walsh had not been effusive since the rally. He had not performed his change of mind or made a production of his reevaluation. He had simply changed quietly in the way that real changes happen, not with announcement, but with behavior. He had referred 3 clients to Noah since the rally. He had told his shop that if anyone came in looking for expertise on pre-1990 Harley engines, the call went to Phoenix. He stood in front of the sign for a moment. Samuel Bennett, Walsh said. You didn't know him, Noah said. No, Walsh said, but I know his work now. He looked at Noah. Every technique of yours I've traced back to its origin this past month came from him. The fuel line cleaning method, the bearing assessment approach, the timing compensation. He paused. He was producing original solutions to problems that most of us were still treating with the standard approach. He always said the standard approach is where knowledge goes to stop moving, Noah said. Walsh considered this. I'm putting that on the wall of my shop, Walsh said. The morning continued the way mornings continue when something important has just been done and the people who did it are standing in the fact of it with coffee and conversation and the ordinary texture of people who are comfortable with each other moving through a shared space. Victor found Noah inside the workshop away from the group for a moment, standing at his workbench and looking at the tools laid out in their new positions on the wall. Samuel's toolbox was on the bench, not as a display piece, as a working tool. The tools inside it were in use every day, alongside the newer equipment because Noah saw no reason to preserve them from use. His grandfather hadn't preserved them. He'd used them until they were worn smooth, and then he'd use them more. How does it feel? Victor said. Noah considered the question honestly. Like the beginning of something, he said. Not like an arrival, like the first day of the real work. Good, Victor said. The day it starts feeling like an arrival is the day the work stops improving. He said that, Noah said. I know, Victor said. He said it to me 40 years ago, and I've thought about it at least once a week since then. He looked at the tools on the wall. He said the danger for talented people isn't failure. It's the moment they think they've arrived. Because the moment you think you've arrived, you stop listening. Noah turned from the wall. He looked at Victor. Will you stay, Noah said. Not permanently, but come back regularly. Work alongside me the way you worked alongside him. Victor looked at him. I was going to offer that myself, Victor said. I didn't know if you'd want an old man taking up bench space. I want an old man who carries crankshaft bearings for 30 years because someone important told him they mattered, Noah said. That's exactly the kind of old man I want taking up bench space. Victor made a sound that was almost a laugh and was something more than that. Then I'll come back, Victor said. Once a month, maybe more. Every 2 weeks, Noah said. Victor looked at him. Every 2 weeks, Victor said. They shook hands at the workbench, which felt right, not a handshake for the room, not a gesture for an audience, just 2 people who respected each other, making an agreement in the place where the work happened. The first motorcycle arrived that same afternoon. It was brought in by a man named Roy, a chapter member who had been at the rally and who had a 1978 Ironhead Sportster that had been running rough for 3 months. Roy had taken it to 2 shops in Phoenix before the rally, and neither shop had resolved the problem. After the rally, he'd waited 6 weeks because he'd promised himself that when Samuel Bennett Motorworks opened its doors, his bike was the first one through. He delivered on the promise. Noah walked around the Sportster. He didn't touch it yet. He asked Roy 4 questions: when the roughness started, under what conditions it was worst, what the 2 previous shops had found, what they'd done in response. He wrote the answers in his log. He asked a 5th question: had anything changed in Roy's irregular riding habits or fuel sourcing in the 3 months before the problem started? Roy thought about this. I changed gas stations, Roy said, started using a place closer to home. Why? Noah didn't answer the question yet. He placed his hand on the engine. He closed his eyes. Victor, who had stayed to watch, stood 6 feet back. Cole, who had come over from the sign hanging to see the first intake, stood behind Victor. Jack, who had followed Roy in from the parking area because he wanted to see how Noah handled his first official client, stood at the edge of the space. The room was quiet. 20 seconds. Noah opened his eyes. Your new gas station is likely blending at a higher ethanol ratio than your previous one, he said. For the Ironhead's carburetor configuration, the fuel-air balance is sensitive to ethanol content above a certain threshold. You've been running lean for 3 months. Roy stared at him. Roy stopped. How? The engine sound has a specific quality when it's running lean, Noah said. The combustion cycle is slightly faster than it should be, and the vibration pattern shifts. It's subtle, but it's consistent. He wrote something in the log. The repair is straightforward. I'll need to rejet the carburetor for the higher ethanol content and set the mixture screw for the new fuel characteristics. How long? Well, 2 hours, Noah said. Maybe less. Roy looked at Jack. Jack looked back at Roy with an expression that said, I would have told you. Roy looked at Noah. Is it always like that? Roy said. The way you just listened to it and knew. Not always, Noah said honestly. Some problems require more time. Some require more digging. He picked up his pen and wrote the first entry in the shop's official work log. Roy's name, the motorcycle's make and year, the date, the initial diagnostic. But this one was talking clearly. Roy watched him write. Talking, Roy said. That's what my grandfather called it, Noah said. He finished writing and looked up. He said if you learn the language, they talk. You just have to be quiet long enough to hear them. Roy looked at the motorcycle. Then he looked at the sign through the open workshop door. Samuel Bennett Motorworks, and then he looked back at Noah. Samuel Bennett taught you, Roy said. Everything I know, Noah said. Roy nodded slowly. Then I'll leave the bike with you, he said, and I'll stop worrying about it. That was the first day. What followed was not overnight transformation or sudden fame. It was slower than that and more real. Word moved through the motorcycle community the way it always moves person to person, through direct experience and direct testimony, the way it had moved when Samuel himself was working, the way all real reputations move in worlds where the work can be verified by anyone who knows what they're looking at. The second bike came the following week, the third the week after. By the end of the first month, there was a wait list. By the end of the second month, the wait list was 3 weeks long. By the end of the third month, people were calling from outside Arizona, from California, from Nevada, from New Mexico, because someone they trusted had said there's a kid in Phoenix who works on vintage engines the way nobody else does, and his shop is named after his grandfather, and you should go. Noah didn't rush the growth. He'd made one rule for the shop from the beginning. Every motorcycle that came in got the full attention it deserved. Not the attention the schedule allowed. Not the attention that fit between other jobs. The full attention. He'd rather turn work away and do the accepted work right than accept more than he could do well. His grandfather had operated the same way, which was one of the reasons Samuel Bennett had never become rich, and also one of the reasons the people who found him never went anywhere else. Walsh came through Phoenix in December on his way to a meeting in Tucson. He stopped at the shop. He spent an hour watching Noah work on a 1969 Electroglide that a collector had brought down from Flagstaff. He watched Noah's process, the same process he'd watched in the parking lot at the rally, the same methodical listening before touching, the same refusal to hurry, and he stood with his arms folded and his expression unreadable until Noah finished the diagnostic and reached for his log. The wait list, Walsh said. 3 weeks, Noah said without looking up. I've got a client in Sacramento with a 72 Sportster that 3 different shops have told him needs a full engine rebuild, Walsh said. I looked at it myself. I don't think it needs a rebuild. Noah wrote the last line of his diagnostic entry and looked up. What do you think it needs? Noah said. I think the primary issue is in the timing, Walsh said. But there's something else. Something I can't quite. Send him down, Noah said. I'll fit him in. Walsh looked at him. I thought the list was 3 weeks. For most things, Noah said. For a sportster, someone's about to rebuild unnecessarily, I'll fit him in. Walsh's expression shifted, the specific shift that happens when you are surprised by someone acting in a way that is generous without announcement. Why, Walsh said. Noah set down his pen. Because my grandfather spent his career refusing to let engines get torn apart when they didn't need to be, Noah said. He said unnecessary rebuilds are an insult to the machine. They take apart something that was trying to tell you something, and instead of listening, you disassemble it until it can't talk anymore. He looked at Walsh steadily. Send him down. Walsh nodded. He didn't say thank you. He said, I'll tell him to expect a call. That was the beginning of something between Walsh and Noah that neither of them named, but both of them understood: a professional relationship built on the foundation of a difficult afternoon and the specific kind of mutual respect that comes from having seen each other clearly in a moment that made clarity unavoidable. Victor came every 2 weeks. He was there on a Tuesday in January when a young woman named Maya arrived at the shop without an appointment, walking in off the street, which Noah's system didn't accommodate, but which he accommodated anyway because she was 17 years old and she'd ridden a 1981 Honda CB75. Oh, to the shop by herself, and the engine of it was clearly struggling in a way she was trying not to show alarm about. She stood in the middle of the workshop and looked at the tools on the wall, and looked at Samuel's toolbox on the bench, and looked at the sign she'd seen through the window from the street. I saw the sign, she said. Samuel Bennett. Is he here? Noah looked at him. He passed away 11 years ago, Noah said. I'm his grandson. She looked at him. He taught you, she said. Yes. She looked at the Honda. My grandfather taught me on that bike, she said. He passed 2 years ago. It's been running bad since last spring. 3 shops told me it was too old to be worth fixing. She looked at Noah. I don't believe them. Noah looked at the Honda. You're right not to believe them, he said. He walked toward it. He placed his hand on the engine. How old are you? 17, she said. When did your grandfather start teaching you? When I was 10, she said. Every weekend. Noah looked at her. Something moved through his expression. A recognition, a specific resonance. The feeling you get when you hear your own story coming from someone else's mouth. Victor, from his position near the bench, was very still. Come here, Noah said. Maya walked to where he was standing beside the Honda. Put your hand on the engine, Noah said. She put her hand on the engine. Close your eyes, Noah said. She closed her eyes. What do you hear? Noah said. She was quiet for a moment. 17 years old in a workshop in Phoenix, one hand on her grandfather's motorcycle, the other at her side, eyes closed, doing what her grandfather had told her to do, the way Noah's grandfather had told Noah to do it, which was to be quiet and pay attention and trust that the machine was speaking if you were willing to learn the language. It's uneven, she said. The vibration, there's a catch. About every 4th cycle, it's slightly different. Noah looked at her. Victor Hale from across the room made a sound. What does that tell you? Noah said. Maya thought about it. Something's missing a beat, she said. Not consistently, but often enough that the engine can't find its rhythm. It's an ignition issue, Noah said. Secondary coil, probably the pickup. Your grandfather's bike is not too old to fix. He took his hand off the engine. It'll be ready in 2 days. Maya opened her eyes. She looked at him. How did you know I'd be able to feel it? She said. Because you learned from someone who taught you to pay attention, Noah said. That's in you now. It doesn't go away. He looked at her steadily. Your grandfather gave you something. You carry it even if you don't always know it's there. Maya was quiet for a moment. Are you taking apprentices? She said. Noah looked at her. He thought about Samuel Bennett in a garage behind a hardware store in Dearborn, Michigan. He thought about a 26-year-old Ray Cutter driving 2 hours to find a mechanic who could fix what 3 shops couldn't. He thought about Victor Hale carrying a crankshaft bearing across 45 years. He thought about a 10-year-old boy sitting beside his grandfather in the afternoons, learning that machines speak and the work is to learn the language, and the patience is the point and the wait is the work. He thought about 17 rejections. He thought about an engine catching in a desert parking lot and 300 people going silent. He looked at Victor. Victor nodded once, a small nod, the nod of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and has just seen it arrive. Noah looked back at Maya. Saturdays, he said, 9 in the morning. You bring the willingness to be quiet and slow. I'll provide the rest. Maya looked at him. That's how he taught you, she said. That's how his grandfather taught him, Victor said from across the room, and how Samuel taught me, and how Samuel taught Noah. He paused. The method doesn't change because the knowledge doesn't change. You learn it by being present and paying attention and trusting that what you're being shown is worth the patience it takes to receive it. Maya looked from Victor to Noah. Saturday, she said. I'll be here. She left. The workshop was quiet for a moment, just Noah and Victor and the Honda and the tools and the log and the sign visible through the open door. The black letters on weathered oak, the name that had no famous shop behind it for 40 years and now had this one. He'd say you're doing it right, Victor said. He'd also say I need to recalibrate the tension on the second bay's air compressor, Noah said. Victor laughed fully this time without restraint, the laugh of a man who knew exactly what he was hearing and loved it without reservation. He would absolutely say that, Victor said. Noah picked up his log. He wrote the day's last entry, Maya, Honda CB 750-1981, ignition secondary coil probable pickup failure. Apprenticeship Saturdays 9 a.m. He capped his pen. He looked at Samuel's toolbox on the bench, the worn screwdriver with SB in the handle, the tools that had spent 40 years in garages and had now found the place they were always supposed to be. He looked at the sign through the door. Outside somewhere in Phoenix, a motorcycle engine started. Someone pulling out of a parking lot, someone heading home, or heading out, someone riding because the road was available and the machine was willing, and the evening air was cool enough to make the ride worth having. The sound rose and then faded as the bike moved away, becoming part of the ambient noise of the city, ordinary and unremarkable to everyone who heard it. To Noah, it sounded like the language he'd been learning his whole life. The shop would grow, the wait list would extend. Mechanics would come from 3 states to watch how Noah worked, and some of them would be humbled by what they saw, and some of them would argue with it until the engine in front of them proved the point, and some of them, the ones who had what it took, would stay long enough to learn. Maya would spend 2 years at the bench beside Noah before opening her own shop in Tucson. And the thing she learned from him was the same thing he had learned from Samuel, which she would pass on in her own time, in her own way, and the chain would continue exactly as it was always supposed to continue. Victor would come every 2 weeks for 4 years until his knees made the drive impossible, and then Noah would go to him because that was how it worked when you owed someone a debt that couldn't be repaid in any currency other than presence. Ray Cutter would cooperate fully with the criminal investigation as he had agreed to do, and would plead to a reduced charge and would lose his business license in Arizona for 3 years. What he did with the knowledge he still carried, Samuel's knowledge sitting in him like something he hadn't earned the right to keep but couldn't give back, was his own reckoning to make, and he made it imperfectly, and over time in the way most people make the reckonings that really matter. Jack rode his father's motorcycle out of Phoenix on a Tuesday morning. In February, heading north on Route 89, the same road where the engine had stopped 3 months before. He rode it for 2 hours into the desert and then turned back, and the engine ran clean the entire way, and the sound of it in the open air was the sound of 30 years of road, and the 8 months his father had spent in a garage choosing every component with care. And it was also, underneath all of that, the sound of a 20-year-old with his grandfather's tools standing in a parking lot and doing the only thing he knew how to do, listening. Because real talent doesn't need a certificate or a clean jacket or an expensive toolbox or a famous name over the door. Real talent needs a machine that's trying to speak and a person who has learned through patience and love and the long work of paying attention how to hear it. And when those two things find each other, when the machine and the person who understands it finally come together after whatever distance separated them, the engine catches and deepens and steadies and runs. And it runs and runs and runs, and it does not stop.